Hi, everyone. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Tonight, I'm joined by my good friend, Dee Pierce, who is the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. How you doing, Dee?
Alrighty, how you doing, Joe?
I'm okay. A little hoarseness in my voice, I guess, but a little vibrato tonight, as it were. Okay, so we have a busy night. Topics are first a piece on the reserve currency, excellent piece, by Robert C. Hockett, who's university professor of law at Cornell University. And we have another great piece following it. It's by Alastair Crooke, and it's on the subject of tariffs and also revolution,
Mm-hmm.
at least the revolution in the international system, which he talks about. And then we have why do I have an ER at the end of the title? Well, okay. Then we have the subject of U.S. Iran talks, and we have a couple of articles on whether the talks are for real or whether they're a pretext. And then we have some perspectives from Larry Johnson in the run-up to the talks in Oman, which the special emissary of Donald Trump, Mr. Witkoff, and Stephen Witkoff uh, engaged in today with the foreign minister, okay, of Iran. And those talks were thought to be crucial. The outcome of those talks was
Okay.
thought to be crucial as to whether there's going to be a war or not. But we don't have any news of the outcome yet. At least I didn't see any. If any of you do have any news, then please make some comments. But as of now, we don't have any news. So we're going to start off the show as usual by sharing on Facebook, and then we'll move to the talk about reserve currency. Okay, so we'll take a moment to share.
Yeah, sharing is caring. Let's get all the shares out. Important to share.
Yes, please do share, everybody.
Okay. Alright, share my other account.
Okay, I'm going to start. Oh, there's Steve Wolfbrand. Hi, Steve. Very nice to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see Steve.
I'm going to start with the first of our articles on the reserve currency by Professor Hockett. It's called Reservations About the Reserve Currency. It has a tagline of Thank Trump for hastening what was always the inevitable, the end of dollar hegemony. And this is uh, by Robert Hockett. It was written on April 12th, 2025. I've been holding it for about a week, as a matter of fact, but still very current. And there's an old $10 bill, the United States note. It's not a Federal Reserve note. It was a bill issued by the Treasury Department itself, okay, as used to be the case, and not a note that was issued by the Federal Reserve. And it was a $10 note. Look at that, there's a buffalo in the middle. How interesting. Or I should say a bison, right? It's actually a bison. Anyway, we'll begin with the introduction. It was always going to happen at some point. The dollar was destined to be replaced as the world's reserve currency, either by a rival or as I have advocated for well over a decade, by a truly globally administered international, not national currency. But as with so many things during Mr. Trump's White House occupations, when this creature is involved, yes, Bob doesn't like President Trump very much. When this creature is involved, things happen faster, they're messier, and far more destructively than would otherwise happen. This is from Robert Hockett's Capital Futures Substack. You can consider becoming a free or paid subscriber. But either way, it's very worthwhile. So what's happening now? Well, two intimately related things. First, the dollar is trading against other currencies at its lowest rate since 2001, the year that saw the beginning of a putative, quote, war on, unquote, rather than self-declared trade war wrought, quote, terror, unquote. And second, yields on Treasury debt, okay, the yields are the interest rates, are now spiking to levels not seen since around the same time.
Mm.
Next section is called Dollars and Treasuries, Sibling Sovereign Liabilities. Okay, what's a liability? Okay, it means that if you have one of these things, federal government, if you have a dollar, if you have a treasury bond, the federal government has to take it back. In other words, the federal government is obligated to take it back. With respect to the treasury, okay, it's obligated to pay it off when it falls due and to pay interest on it. And with a dollar, it has to take back the dollar and provide a tax credit. So both of these things are liabilities of the federal government in that precise sense. As I say, these are intimately related phenomena, so closely related indeed as to be simply two sides of one actual dynamic. There are several angles from which to appreciate this. For one thing, both the dollar and the U.S. Treasury security are U.S. sovereign liabilities. The quote dollar bill, unquote, aka also known as, quote, the Federal Reserve note, unquote, is as much a liability of the Fed, okay, a U.S. government instrumentality,
Mute myself.
okay, as the Treasury bill, Treasury note, and Treasury bond are liabilities of the U.S. Treasury, another U.S. government instrumentality. So note how carefully couched this language is. Both the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury are instrumentalities of the federal government, through which the federal government realizes its purposes. It thus stands to reason that demand for the one from abroad would move in tandem with demand for the other. Same issuer, in effect, same ultimate risk. For another, U.S. Treasuries are purchased with dollars. Demand for the former abroad must be satisfied through first, prior satisfaction of ancillary demand for the latter. Hence again, demand curves for both will tend in large part to move in tandem. That is, a lower price for the one will accordingly mean a lower price for, hence higher yield demanded of the other. All right, so they joined at the hip, but does it matter? Do the price drops and yield spikes augur good or ill? Dollars and Treasuries, titled the next section, a rogue uh, Romulus and Remus. Interesting reference to the two brothers who are supposed to have been the founders of Rome. Well, as partly suggested above, it could have augured good, but in Trump's hands, it's probably ill, very ill. Here's why. The dollar's high value and Treasury's low yields have been bad news for U.S. industry and indeed for the world for well over half a century now. The dollar's role as global reserve currency, a classic hegemon's privilege, a kind of global seigniorage, results in its overvaluation relative to actual goods and services that the U.S. produces. That prices U.S. goods out of global markets and hence undermines the U.S. Industry. At the same time, treasuries correlate overvaluation has meant ultra low, oft even, quote, negative, unquote, excuse me, U.S. borrowing costs abroad, rendering the financing of hegemonic bullying, quote, neo-colonialist, unquote, behavior, all too easy to the wider world's detriment and chagrin. It has also, moreover, encouraged the U.S. not to bother with producing the means of its own prosperity, instead relying on unproductive seigniorage revenue, a form of mere rent extraction afforded by the global protection racket that it, in effect, offers. For these reasons, I have long advocated in articles, and now have a book coming out to the same effect, that the U.S. must partner with China and other economies in establishing something like a modern digital rendition of J.M. Keynes's original International Clearing Union, ICU, plan for what ultimately became a very different International Monetary Fund, IMF, in 1944. Dollars, treasuries, and digital bank cores, bringing the Beavis and Butthead of world money to heel, H-E-E-L, and to heal, H-E-A-L. Romulus and Remus and Beavis and Butthead. Under this plan, a bona fide global central bank operated by all the world's trading nations would issue a bona fide global currency. Keynes called it, quote, the Bancor, unquote, just as our national central banks issue national currencies. This bank would modulate currency supplies to ensure adequate trading liquidity on the one hand, while averting both inflationary and deflationary pressures on the other hand, again, as do all nation central banks. Crucially, this same bank would periodically revalue national currencies relative to its own so as to prevent long-term current trade account and capital account imbalances between nations. The kind of thing Trump claims to be exercised about. As I argue in the mentioned work, the president could have been and maybe still is, a most opportune time to do this. For after 50 plus years of ever growing current account deficits and concomitant deindustrialization, the USA is now able to see the wisdom of such an arrangement as Britain, but not the US itself, was able to see back in 1944, while B also still possessed of some global bargaining power, such as it, but not Britain, had in that same fateful post-war year. But alas, Trump. Next section is entitled Enter Orange Julius. Out Beavising Beavis, out Buttheading Butthead. I wish I knew more about, Beavis and Butthead. I never saw very much of those two things, but I'm sure if I had been more interested in them, I would very much enjoy Bob's talking about Beavising Beavis and Buttheading Butthead. Bonnie shrugs her shoulders. Mr. Trump, building upon the fine work of Mr. Biden earlier, albeit less dramatically to the same end, is now doing all that he can to nullify point B that I just mentioned. Point B, once again, to refresh your memory. While B also still possessed of some global bargaining power, such as it, but not Britain, had in that same fateful post-war year. So, what Bob is saying is that Mr. Trump, building upon the fine work of Mr. Biden, is now doing all he can to justify point B, the global influence of the United States, which was just mentioned. That is to say, he is now rapidly draining off what little influence the U.S. until recently could have wielded in arranging with China and other nations to establish a latter-day Keynesian ICU, International Currency Unit, again, that could operate fairly for all. How, you might ask, has he accomplished this miracle of non-creative destruction? Well, consider. Notwithstanding the dysfunctions of current global currency arrangements noted above, the U.S. has managed to avert a debacle thus far because, quote, one, there is as yet no known tipping point, quote unquote, for when a global currency hegemon's debt to GDP ratio after long-term rises like that of the U.S. becomes, quote, unsustainable, unquote. Japan still holds the record and is yet to tumble. I think Japan is close to a debt to GDP ratio of 300%, with no indication of it becoming unsustainable. There's a great deal of logic in the assumption that it will never become unsustainable. And that logic comes from the idea that if a nation is a monetary sovereign, as Japan is and as the US is, that it can always create the currency it needs to pay off any debt. So any debt to GDP ratio, of course, is always sustainable because of this power of the currency issuer. Number two, the US has been reliably internally stable as a domestic political matter since 1865, and as a public financial matter since Hamilton's first prioritizing the development of a perfect national credit rating in 1787. And three, there is literally no credible alternative safe asset market to the nearly $30 trillion U.S. Treasury market since the European monetary union will remain shaky until Europe finally institutes a Hamiltonian fiscal transfer union to match its monetary union. B, China, till recently, has needed weak currency to effectuate its export led national growth model. And C, every other potential issuer, including Japan, is just too debt small in comparison to that $30 trillion US market. The key to understanding what is happening right now is to understand how Trump is now undercutting both 2 and 3, and with all the 2s and 3s and A's and B's and C's, it's always good to remind us. 2 is the U.S. has been reliably internally stable as a domestic political matter since 1865, and as a public financial matter since Hamilton's first prioritizing the development of a perfect national credit rating in 1787. And 3, there is literally no credible alternative safe asset market to the nearly $30 trillion U.S. Treasury market. So Trump is now undercutting both of those things, both the safe asset market and also the political and financial stability of the United States. On 2, Trump, of course, doesn't care a whit about norms, rules, laws, reputations, words as bonds, truth or trust, credit ratings, or the like. He is indeed personally a serial bankrupt and deadbeat himself, and seems to think this evidence that he's savvy. He is also, of course, profoundly unstable as a personality and seems to infect all that he touches with a counterpart volatility. Add to this his effective declaration of war on the entire world, including traditional U.S. friends and allies, and it is goodbye, stable and reliably ally-committed, credit-concerned U.S. Then on 3, the BRICS and allied countries' recent moves towards constituting a real global alternative to the dollar seem to have become irrevocably serious at last. That in turn looks to be stemming from several critical, quote, game-changing, unquote, and, quote, globe-changing factors. First, the BRICS and most other countries are now all decisively sick of U.S. bullying, financial and otherwise, especially since the Ukraine, quote, hot war, unquote, commenced in early 2022. Second, they all can now see the U.S. as fully as incontinent and non-compos mentis, as is its orange Caligula. Third, they no longer need keep their currencies cheap for the U.S. market, since the latter is no longer reliable anyway. And finally, fourth, China has been committed to shifting from export-led to domestic-led growth for a while now in any event, such that the current situation will simply force them to speed that effort up a bit, which China is always good at, by the way, speeding up in a pinch. In short, then, sure, we still cannot know with certainty that an inflection point where the dollar's global reserve currency status is concerned is now imminent. But when we remind ourselves why the U.S. has been able for so long to do and get away with what it does, it is easy to see precisely how Mr. Trump has taken the axe to that, thereby converting the prospect of a near-term end to U.S. debt privilege from merely wishful thinking before to not unrealistic prospect now. That is a first, not only in our, but even in our grandparents' and great-grandparents' lifetimes. Conclusion: to be clear, the ultimate demise of the dollar and dollar-denominated treasuries was going to happen in any event, as China inexorably displaces then replaces the U.S. as a center of global production and civilization. Its own currency, if not a bona fide global currency, would displace and then replace the dollar. China is smart enough and seemingly universalist, moreover, not to repeat U.S. mistakes by allowing its own currency, rather than a latter day Bancor, to become the global reserve currency. In that sense, things would grow better than they are presently, with or without the U.S. is taking its current uh, Caligula's turn. I guess Bob really likes the Roman analogies, but I have to say they may be apt in this particular situation. At least Trump doesn't have a violin, so he's more a Caligula than he is a Nero. The process, however, could have been far smoother, far stabler, and far less painful. Not to say calamitous than it appears likely now. And that is, while Nero might well have supplied entertainment, his fiddling, while Rome burned much as is now, Mr. Celebrity Apprentice, Rome did indeed burn. Unless Congress acts quickly to withdraw its latter-day Tonkin Gulf trade resolution and deny Nero the unilateral trade war authority he's now whipping about like the proverbial swinging D blank blank K, unquote, D blank blank K, we shall soon know another debacle in Asia like that enabled by its 1964 antecedent, the one that let LBJ wreak war crime and ruin in Vietnam, much as DJT is now wreaking worldwide. That, of course, is a brilliant piece, okay, of blogging. It is, of course, continuously sarcastic and droll in how he expressed himself. But it makes a number, okay, of very key points and ends with a conclusion that is very, very important. Okay, and that is, unless Congress can quickly change things, unless Congress can wake up and quickly change things, then we're probably looking at a situation that we will have perhaps a war with Iran, and perhaps even a war with China as well. Because with the unilaterally trade war authority that Trump has, that he's now whipping about like the proverbial swinging D blank blank K, he can spend as much money as he wants on wars in Asia. And he may be bent on doing just that. But whether he is bent on doing just that or not, we will consider in the rest of this particular stream. Dee, do you have any comments on that brilliant piece?
Yeah, well, what's really interesting is a lot of people, from what I'm, different analysis, seems to say that Trump really, and plus, what's his name, who was over there talking today, they don't want war.
Oh,
But
you mean Mr. Witkoff,
yes,
Steve
but
Witkoff.
yeah, the problem they have is you have Netanyahu, and then you have all of the warmongers in the U.S. And the Republican Party, the bunch of neocons there.
In the
You know,
Republican Party, but also within the Trump
yeah,
administration.
exactly. Then, of course, the Democratic Party, you have them too, but you've got that consolidation. You have that group of people that are just, you know, they just are drooling like for this war with Iran. They have something in mind that is not reality. They don't realize Iran of today.
They don't realize, the Iran, of today. And we'll have occasion to discuss that uh, in line with quite a few of the other articles that we're going to go through, and specifically to discuss the failure of people here in the United States to understand what they're dealing with in terms of Iran and what they're dealing with in terms of the alliance of Iran and Russia and China,
Yes.
because those three are right now closely linked, especially Iran and Russia. But China and Russia are very, very close together also. So, in effect, the three of them are very, very close together. There's a very close alliance going on, I think, even though it may not be a formal alliance. It's at least as close as the Allies were in the run up to World War One. And that doesn't augur well for the possibility of World War III
No.
if Trump keeps on pushing things, as he sometimes seems to be doing, at least with respect to Iran. Sometimes he seems to be pushing very, very strongly. Other times he seems to be backing off. He doesn't seem to know what he wants to do. In the rest of the articles for today, we will basically be cataloging uh, his moves back and forth and back and forth. And uh, we'll be considering a lot the run up to these negotiations today that we still don't yet have any news from.
And the problem is that the U.S. government, um, all the administrations do the same thing. They listen to the Israeli narrative only. They listen to Netanyahu like he's the know-it-all, and they don't want to listen to anyone else.
Well, some in this administration seem to be listening, a little differently, as we will see as we go through things. I think it's also true the Democratic Party, uh, or standard kinds of Democrats, have different views when it comes to war with Iran and war with China. They're less inclined to want to do those wars, uh, but they seem to be very much inclined, of course, to support the Israelis and what they're doing in Palestine, and also to support the collective West in its Ukraine war, which Trump seems to be trying to get away from and get out of,
Mm-hmm.
but is having uh, he's having lots of difficulty in doing so, but he's taking definite steps to do so. Okay, so this is kind of a mess. People pulling in, very different ways, and as we'll see,
Yes, they are.
people in the Trump administration pulling different ways too. I think the Trump administration is kind of split on this.
Yes, because you have Witkoff and some of them that really are listening. And then you have the others that are just party. I don't know. They just go with Israel no matter what. I think they've taken so much money from Israel that
Yeah, they're going with Israel, no matter what, but to the extent that they're not only supporting what Israel is doing in Gaza, but also supporting the widening of the war, to get Iran involved, in the war. I don't think the Democrats are so anxious to do that.
right. It's not good. It's not good, and they're going to have to convince U.S. U.S. citizens to go to war to die for Israel because Netanyahu wants this war?
Right, and if we're talking about going to war and dying for other countries, then the issue of ground troops becomes quite important. We we don't have the ground troops to go after Yemen, much less the ground troops to go after Iran. I mean,
No.
it's just ridiculous. I mean, our whole army right now is about 430,000 people. Okay, 430,000 people is not enough to subdue the Yemenis. I mean,
Right.
it's just not. They'll slaughter the 400,000. As for Iran, uh, they have something like 1 million in their standing army.
Mm.
And, you know,
Right. And to tell that you have to die for some other country when it's not even your own national security, it's not anything happening here where you're standing for your own security, your own people.
exactly. That's exactly true. Exactly true. Okay, let's move on to the next piece, which is quite interesting. It's okay. It's a piece from Alastair Crooke. And I think it's your turn to take up this piece.
Okay. Trump acts as a stricken world order, but there's opportunity amidst the turmoil. Alastair Crooke, April 16th, 2025.
Yes. Uh, if there's one person who's just a super expert when it comes to the Middle East, by the Middle East, I mean Lebanon, Israel, the Gulf countries, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, and Egypt, okay, and Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
That person, uh, and Saudi, I should include also. That person, okay, is Alastair Crooke. He just knows this area inside out.
Mm-hmm.
He has contacts in every country, and he has an understanding of the cultures, and I think some understanding of the languages too. Anyway, there's Trump, and he's riding the broomstick. Okay,
Okay.
and it's an interesting cartoon.
Trump's actions were neither spur of the moment nor whimsical. The tariff solution had been pre-prepared by his team over years.
And since it had been pre-prepared by his team over years, I have to ask at this point, if they thought about it for years and years, how could they get it so wrong? I mean, this implies that they'd been careful in thinking about it, okay, and designing it.
Mm-hmm.
And if so, how could it be blowing back in their face as much as it is? But please go on.
The Trump shock. His decentering of America from serving as pivot to the post-war order via the dollar has triggered a deep cleavage between those who gained huge benefit from the status quo on the one hand, and on the other hand, the MAGA faction who have come to regard the status quo as inimical, even an existential threat to U.S. interests. The sides have descended into bitter accusatory polarization. It is one of the ironies of the moment that President Donald J. Trump and right-wing Republicans have insisted on decrying as a, quote, resource curse the benefits of the reserve currency status that precisely brought the U.S. the wave of inward global savings that has permitted the U.S. to enjoy the unique privilege of printing money without adverse consequences. Until now, that is, debt levels finally matter, it seems, even for Leviathan.
Okay, I have to comment on this here. Okay, you'll notice, okay, in
Uh,
the first article, by Bob Hockett, he takes it, okay, as axiomatic
mm-hmm,
that the status of the reserve currency for the U.S. was responsible for the decline in production inside of the U.S. because it was so easy to get goods from other countries, in return for the dollar. Okay, because everybody wanted the dollar because it was, the reserve currency of the world. So we had to produce less and less over the years because other countries wanted to have the reserve currency. So they sold
mm-hmm,
things to us in return for the electronic bits of information that constituted the dollar. Okay, so uh, though Bob, I would definitely characterize as a leftist, uh, he agrees with the right wing of the Republican Party, okay, that the reserve currency was a resource curse, but for us. Okay, he also knows very well, okay, that the debt levels inside of the United States do not matter
mm-hmm.
because we're a monetary sovereign. And we had an article from him actually last week on the tariffs that emphasized also the monetary sovereignty of the United States. He's very well aware of the monetary sovereignty of the United States. So he, okay, and people who like the MMT approach to economics, such as ourselves, we know that the debt levels do not finally matter. It's not because uh, we no longer have the reserve currency, and I think it is on the point, okay, of going away. But since we are a monetary sovereign, the debt levels don't matter for us in the sense that they don't matter for the fiscal sustainability of the United States. Now, there are many people, such as Alastair, who believed that it was the status of the reserve currency, that allowed us to run very, very high debts, and it didn't seem to matter for fiscal sustainability. But Alastair never understood, and perhaps he never thought about the fact that debt levels have never mattered for Japan, and Japan has never had the reserve currency. But like the United States, Japan is a monetary sovereign,
Mm-hmm.
and it has debt levels and a debt to GDP ratio far higher than the US debt to GDP ratio. So it's not the reserve currency that gives you the privilege uh, of creating money without adverse consequence, but it's the status of your being a monetary sovereign which allows you to do that. Please go on.
Okay. Vice President Vance now likens the reserve currency to a, quote, parasite that has eaten away the substance of its host, the U.S. economy. by forcing an overvalued dollar.
Yeah, I partly agree with Vice President Vance on that, which is a surprise because I think there's very little I agree with him on. But let's go.
Just to be clear, President Donald J. Trump believed there was no choice. Either he could upend the existing paradigm at the cost of considerable pain for many of those dependent on the financialized system, or he could allow events to wend their way towards an inevitable U.S. economic collapse. Even those who understood the dilemma the U.S. faces nonetheless have been somewhat shocked by the self-serving brazenness of him simply, quote, tariffing the world.
Okay, those words sound very good, and it's probably true that he perceived his tariffing of the world as self-serving. But there is, of course, the question as to whether it really was self-serving, because it seems to be blowing back right in his face. Please continue.
Right, because he wasn't acting as a diplomat. He was being the bully.
Yes, he was being the bully, and he imposed the tariffs instead of a gradual imposition of tariffs and a strategic imposition of tariffs. He did it all at once because, of course, he's so impatient and he believes in breaking things. But I think he miscalculated what the reactions were going to be, not just from the rest of the world of nations hitting back at the United States, but from his own base.
Mm-hmm.
That part of his base, which is the billionaire base, they're getting hurt severely by this. I mean, it's likely if it continues in the way it has, that Elon Musk could even end up in bankruptcy because of what's happening to him. Okay, and the big banks could be failing, and the whole thing could be collapsing. And these people who were supporting Trump, who had their finances, their whole financial system uh, 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 was built on the status quo. The hedge funders of the world, the Bill Ackmans of the world, uh, uh, all the people who were so happy to contribute to him and get him into the presidency. Uh, it's highly volatile for those people today. On the one hand, they got a forewarning of his rolling back the tariffs uh, 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 about a week ago. And with the forewarning, they made something like 305 billion the day after the announcement, uh, which of course went very, very badly for other people who did not have the forewarning. But pretty soon the market started to go bad again for them, and they started to lose money the days after that. And all in all, I think they've been put into a bad financial position by Trump. But anyway, please go on.
Trump's actions, as many claim, were neither spur of the moment nor whimsical. The tariff solution had been pre-prepared by his team over recent years and formed an integral part to a more complex framework, one that complemented the debt reduction and revenue effects of tariffs by a program to coerce the repatriation of vanished manufacturing industry back to America.
Right. I think that is their theory. Okay. In part, that was the theory of his team. Uh, but I think what they failed to see is how serious the short term implications of his tariffs, okay, were going to be. And they also failed to consider how long a period it would be before they could get the results of coercing the repatriation of manufacturing to America's shores. Please go on.
Trump Trump's is a gamble that may or may not succeed. It risks a bigger financial crisis as financial markets are over leveraged and fragile.
Yes, indeed.
But what is clear is that the decentering of America that will follow from the crude threats and humiliation of world leaders ultimately will cause a counter reaction both for relations with the U.S. and also in global willingness to continue to hold U.S. assets, such as U.S. Treasuries. China's defiance of Trump will set a tone even for those who lack China's heft.
I think that paragraph K is very, very good, and I also think that uh, it's really spot on when it talks about uh, the impact on others of continuing to hold U.S. assets, such as U.S. treasuries.
Hmm.
Won't want to hold those treasuries. They're going to divest themselves, okay, of those treasuries. And the shame of it is that the conventional people here are going to view this as a tragedy because they're going to go,
Hmm.
what are we going to do? We can't run deficit anymore because nobody's
Hmm.
going to buy our treasuries. Of course, there are a number of MMT answers to that, but the basic MMT answers to that, we never needed to sell the treasuries in the first place. We
Hmm.
just could have done the deficit spending and created the money to do the deficit spending, and we could have used that money to pay back the treasuries um, 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 as they fell due. And since we would always be paying back the treasuries and the interest, okay, that was due on the treasuries, then that would have a counteracting effect, okay, to the collapse, because if people just continued to hold on to the treasuries, they would uh, okay, until the treasuries fell due, and that's not really a long time because about half the treasuries out there are short-term treasuries of 6 months, to a year. If they would continue to hold on to them for 6 months to a year, uh, okay, then the U.S. would pay back those treasuries. And if it wasn't able to get any people to, buy any more treasuries, it could just cover the deficit spending, uh, with money created here. And as for longer term assets, people would have to hold on to them until they fell due. But as long as they were willing to do that, they would be made whole.
Hmm.
Every dollar actually repaid. Anyway, please go on.
Why then should Trump take such a risk? Because behind Trump's bold-faced actions, notes Simplicius, lies a harsh reality facing many MAGA supporters.
Right. And here's a quote from Simplicius, who I gather, or Simplicius, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I gather that's a blogger, Simplicius,
Yes.
Simplicius. But anyway,
Uh,
please go on with the quote.
quote, it remains inarguable that the American workforce has been gutted by the triple threat of mass migration, general worker anomy as a consequence of cultural decay, and in particular by the mass alienation and disenfranchisement of conservatively minded men. These have been strongly contributing factors to the current crisis of doubt about the ability of American manufacturing to ever return to a semblance of its previous glory, no matter how big an axe Trump takes to the stricken world order.
Right. So I agree with the idea, okay, of enemy, among the workers. and cultural decay, okay, and the idea of strongly contributing factors of doubt about the ability of our manufacturing to ever return to a semblance, okay, of its previous glory. I mean, I agree that there are doubts about that, but I think the doubts, okay, are misplaced because, uh, okay, uh, I believe in the power of monetary sovereignty by the government uh, to return to a Hamiltonian program of supporting industry in this country and creating industries in this country, and until the industries grow, providing the federal job guarantee, okay, at a living wage, a socially inclusive type of living wage to everybody who wants to work. And I think such a program would actually heal the enemy, would provide hope, but to the workers, and a sense of optimism to the workers, as happened in a similar period, during the Depression. And on the basis, okay, of that improved optimism among the American population, renewed investments, in manufacturing would find a workforce that was very willing to work the skills that it had to have to make that manufacturing a success. Our manufacturing can return not only to a semblance of its previous glory, but can exceed its, um, uh, uh, its previous glory, because the basic characteristics, okay, of American workers and the strength, okay, of the monetary system as wielded by the government are such that we can rebuild our manufacturing to whatever state our political system decides it wants it to return to. It depends on whether the will is there, but the resources are there, the tools, okay, are there, the general intelligence of the workers, okay, is there. All you have to do is give people a reason to hope, and the money and the organization,
Hmm.
and also the investments. But of course, if the private sector, okay, is not initially willing to make the investments, then certainly the government can make the investments. And on that basis, by reducing the risk to the private sector, it can get as much investment from the private sector as it's eventually going to need.
Hmm.
It's just, I mean, we've done it before. It's reintroducing the Hamiltonian process. It's the partnership of government, okay, and industry and labor unions that can create a tremendously strong sector in production, okay, in manufacturing again. It can happen. It depends on whether we want to organize it again. It can happen in the form of the Green New Deal. Please go on.
Okay. Trump is mounting a revolution in order to invert his reality and end to the American enemy by Trump's hopes bringing back U.S. industry.
The problem is he can't bring back the industry simply by tariffing. He's going to need industrial policy.
Yes, he does.
And if he's not willing to do industrial policy, or to bring in the people who can figure out industrial policy for him, he's going to fail. He's on the point
Exactly.
of failing now because he's got a bunch of idiots in his administration who don't know anything about industrial policy,
Right.
who don't know anything about the history of the building of American industry. I mean, his economics team is full of idiots. who, th-
Exactly.
who thinks it all happens, through the free market. It doesn't happen through the free market. It's never happened through a free market. It's always happened because government has been working with industrialists and business to subsidize them so that they build great industrial bases in various nations.
Ex-
That's what happened in Germany before the Second World War. That's what happened here in the United States going through the 1930s and into the Second World War. Uh, that's what happened, during the 19th century. That's what happened in Japan when it built its industrial base. And that's what's happened in China. The vocabulary is different, the ideals are different, there are cultural differences, but it's always through a partnership of government and industry and labor that this happens. Please go on.
There is a current of Western public opinion, quote, by no means limited to intellectuals, nor to Americans alone, that despairs of their own country's, quote, lack of will, or its inability to do what needs to be done, its fecklessness, and its crisis of competence. These people hanker for leadership believed to be tougher and more decisive, a longing for unconstrained power and ruthlessness.
Okay, I believe that longing can be there and it may be there to some degree, but I think they're not just looking for leadership that's tougher, and more decisive, and that uh, is one that's ruthless and unconstrained. But even more than the ruthlessness and unconstrained power, what they're looking for is results and competence. They're looking for competence from their leadership, and that is what Trump uh, 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 is lacking. He has enough power; it's inherent in the presidency, okay, and inherent in the Congress to build back up. He doesn't need any more ruthlessness than he's been showing to build back up. But what he needs is more competence and the proper policies to build back up. And he seems far away from those because he looked at the tariffs as magic that was going to bring back everything.
Okay, there is, I think you went up too far.
Oh, did I?
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. There is a current of Western public opinion, quote, by no means limited to, did I read the right, intellectuals, nor to Americans alone, that despairs of their own country's lack of will or its inability to do what needs to be done, its fecklessness of its crisis of competence. These people hanker for a leadership believed to be tougher and more decisive, a longing for unconstrained power and ruthlessness. One high paying, whatever,
Okay. Did I again go too far?
yeah. One high placed Trump supporters put it quite brutally. Quote, we are now at a very important inflection point. If we are going to face the big ugly with China, we cannot afford divided loyalties. It's time to get mean, brutally, harshly mean. Delicate sensibilities must be dispatched like a feather in a hurricane. Ugh, that's disgusting.
That is disgusting. And okay, it's also not true because I think the loyalties can be created by the competence and results, okay, of good policies. That's what's happened during the 1930s. That's what happened also during the 1940s. And that's what happened in the following post war years. when the economy of the United States was the envy of the world. Okay, and when we were highly uh, um, um, you know, united.
Mhm.
We were in those periods very, very loyal to the country, okay, and to each other. And the reason
Mhm.
was that our leadership was competent and more humane, okay, at that time than it is now.
Hmm.
Please go on.
It is no surprise that, against the general context of Western nihilism, a mindset that admires power and ruthless technocratic solutions, almost ruthless for its own sake, could take hold. Take note, we are all in for a turbulent future. The West's economic unraveling has been made more complicated by Trump's often contradictory statements, and may be part to his repertoire. Yes, nonetheless, the haphazardness evokes the thought that nothing is trustworthy, nothing is constant.
Right, and people do not thirst for that.
Hmm.
They want trustworthiness and constancy, the kind that comes along with competence
Hmm.
in policy and in the implementation of policy.
It's been reported by White House insiders that Trump has lost all inhibition when it comes to bold action. He's at the peak of just not giving a F anymore. A White House official familiar with Trump's thinking told the Washington Post, quote, bad news stories. He doesn't give a F. He's going to do what he's going to do. He's going to do what he promised to do on the campaign trail.
Okay, so comment on that. He's already backing off.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he paused those tariffs for 90 days. Why? Because the reaction he got from all over the country and from all kinds of people is no, we don't want this. Now, he's still continuing with the stupidity with China, but he also already withdrew from a list of products that he's making exceptions. He's making exceptions to the tariffs with regard to iPhones, with regard to computers, with regard to other technology products, which amount to 1/3 of the total trade we have with China. He's putting that under an exception. Why? Because he's learned those tariffs don't work because we need to have those products. And China's about to teach him some other lessons
Oh, yeah.
because China is teaching him he needs some other products besides, and that if he wants to trade for those other products, he better roll back the tariffs on those products too. Anyway, please go on.
When some portion of the country's population despairs of their own country's lack of will or inability to do what needs to be done, Aurelian argues they begin, from time to time, to identify emotionally with another country, I believed to be tougher and more decisive. In this particular moment, the mantle of being some sort of nation superhero, beyond consideration of good and evil, landed upon Israel, at least for an influential layer of both the US and European policymakers. Iranian country continues, quote, Israel, whose combination of a superficially Western style society with audacity, ruthlessness, and a total disregard for international law and human life, was exciting to many and has become a model for emulation. Western support for Israel in Gaza makes much more sense when you realize that Western politicians and parts of the intellectual class secretly admire the ruthlessness and brutality of Israel's war. It is so disgusting.
Yes, it's very disgusting, and I don't know how true that is. I don't know how large the group is who secretly admire the ruthlessness and brutality, okay, of Israel's war. And certainly, whether they do that or not, they cannot be blind to the fact that Israeli society is currently falling apart.
Yes, it is.
Because of the war, the economy has gone to hell. And because of the war, uh, there's something like a 50-50 split in terms of people who support the government and who oppose the government. And there are big demonstrations now continuously. And the only reason why they're not there on a day to day basis is because so many of the Israelis are running for air raid shelters to dodge the missiles of the Houthis.
Hmm.
Please go on.
Yet, despite the disruption and the pain caused by the U.S. Quote turn, it nonetheless represents a huge opportunity to shift to an alternate societal paradigm beyond neoliberal financialism. This has been ruled out until now by the elite insistence on TINA. There is no alternative. Now the door is open a crack.
Yeah, there's no alternative was the famous mantra, okay, of Maggie Thatcher
Yeah.
in Britain, who brought in neoliberal ideas to Britain and made them dominant, okay, in the UK.
Carl Pollyanna, in his Great Transformation, published some 80 years ago, held that the massive economic and societal transformations that he had witnessed during his lifetime, the end of the century of relative peace in Europe from 1815 to 1914, and the subsequent descent into economic turmoil, fascism, and war, which was still ongoing at the time of the book's publication, not had but a single overarching cause. Prior to the 19th century, Pollyanna insisted the human way of being, economics as an organic component of society, had always been embedded in society and subordinated to local politics, customs, religion, and social relations, i.e., subordinated to a civilizational culture. Life was not treated as separate, not reduced to distinct particulars, but was viewed as parts to an organic whole, that is, to life itself. Postmodern nihilism that descended into unregulated neoliberalism of the 1980s turned this logic on its head. As such, it constituted an ontological break with much of history. Not only did it artificially separate the economics from the political and ethical way of being, but open free trade economics, in its Adam Smith formulation, demanded that the subordination of society to be abstract logical of the self-regulating market. For Polanyi, this meant no less than the running of community as an adjunct to the market and nothing more. The answer clearly was to make society again the dominant part to a distinctly human community, give it meaningful through a living culture. Yeah, give it meaning through a living culture. In this sense, Pollyanna also emphasized the territorial character of sovereignty, the nation state as the sovereign precondition to the exercise of democratic politics. Polanyi would have argued that, absent a return to life itself as a central pivot to politics, A violent backlash was inevitable. In such a backlash, what we are seeing today. At a conference of Russian industrialists and entrepreneurs on 18 March 2025, Putin referred precisely to a, quote, national economics alternative solution for Russia. Putin highlighted both the imposed siege on the state and set out the Russian response to it, a model which is likely to be adopted by much of the globe. It is a mode of economic thinking that is already practiced by China, which had anticipated Trump's tariff blitz.
Yes, I have to mention here that is a line that is very critical.
Mm-hmm.
Mode of economic thinking was anticipated by China, and China has been engaged in it now for many, many years, and it is responsible for the rise uh, uh, for China's rise to power and to success, okay, and to prosperity. Please go on.
Putin's address, metaphorical speaking, constitutes the financial counterpart.
Sorry, I keep going to the wrong thing to move it down.
Mm-hmm. To his 2007 Munich Security Forum speech, at which he accepted the military defeat posed by collective NATO. Last month, however, he went further. Putin stated clearly that Russia had accepted the challenge posed by the Anglo open economy financial order. Putin's address was, in one sense, nothing really new. It was the shift from the open economy model towards national economics. The National Economic School of the 19th century argued that Adam Smith's analysis, which was heavily focused on individualism and cosmopolitanism, overlooked the critical role of the national economy. The result of a general free trade would not be a universal republic, but on the contrary, a universal subjection of the less advanced nations by the predominant manufacturing and commercial powers. Those advocating for a national economy countered Smith's open economy by advocating a closed economy to allow nascent industries to grow and become competitive on the global stage. Quote, hold to no illusions. There is nothing beyond this reality. Putin warned the gathered Russian industrialists in March 2025, and it has, yes, see, illusions aside, he told delegates. He says, quote, sanctions and restrictions are today's reality, together with a new spiral of economic rivalry already unleashed. Sanctions are neither temporary nor targeted measures. They constitute a mechanism of systematic, strategic pressure against our nation. Regardless of global developments or shifts in the international order, our competitors will perpetually seek to constrain Russia and to diminish its economic and technological capacities. You should not hope for complete freedom of trade, payments, and capital transfers. You should not count on Western mechanisms to protect the rights of investors and entrepreneurs. I'm not talking about any legal systems. They just don't exist. They exist there only for themselves. That's the trick. Do you understand? Our Russian challenges exist, yes, Putin said. But theirs are abundant also. Western dominance is slipping away. New centers of global growth are taking center stage. These challenges are not the problem. They are the opportunity, Putin argued. We will prioritize domestic manufacturing and the development of tech industries. The old model is over. Oil and gas production will be simply the adjunct to a largely internally circulating self-sufficient real economy. With energy no longer its driver, we are open to Western investment, but only on our terms. And the small open sector of our otherwise closed, self-circulating real economy will, of course, still trade with our BRICS partners.
Sorry. Let me get that right back.
Russia is returning to the national economy model, Putin implied. This makes us sanction and tariff resistant. Russia is also inducement resistant, being self-sufficient in energy and raw materials. Putin said a clear alternate economic paradigm in the face of an unraveling world order.
Okay, so I think those words by Putin are incredibly wise, viewed from the perspective of his country and the development of his country, and its prosperity, and existence. But I don't think the thinking is really that new. Thinking like that, uh, as is stated here by Alastair, was prevalent in those countries that were developing in the 19th century in comparison to the countries that were already fairly developed. The paradigm of those, of course, was the UK. And the UK wanted everyone to engage in free trade, but some of the other countries, in order to develop, understood that a free trade model was not so advantageous to them. So, to some degree, they closed up their economies, so they were able to develop. Russia actually did that in the latter part of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century. And those years were a time of very rapid development for the capitalism sector of the Russian um, um, uh, of their economy at that time. Okay, now the Russians were developing so fast, they were not uh, 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 um, uh, addressing the task of integrating the agricultural sectors of their economy and the labor sectors of their economy. And so they hit a situation where the conflicts internally were so strong that, and World War One was the cause of the revolution in Russia. Before World War One, the monarchy there was able to contain the tensions within the society that were resulting from the very rapid changes that were taking place due to the development of the capitalist aspect of the economy. But the breakdown caused by this First World War made it impossible for the Russian government to contain the tensions. Okay, and the Tsars actually fell, and the revolution took place. Okay, in Russia. Okay, but when the communists took over, they also stuck to a national economics sort of model while they tried to bring revolutions in other countries. Their own economy developed over time as a version, of autarky. It was an extreme version, of national economics. It, is not generally open to the rest of the world, but it grew very fast. and industrialization in Russia during the communist period was very, very rapid, right up through the 1950s and 1960s. Then the economy started to stagnate because it was not open to the world. Okay, it resisted essentially trading. Its currency was not allowed to free float in the world environment. Okay, eventually the stagnant economy caused the fall of the Soviet Union. Okay, so there's a limit to the success of an extreme form of national economics. But for now, I think Putin is right to concentrate on that, as the Chinese are right, okay, to concentrate on that also. Uh, and I think they're right to consider their focus on uh, uh, their own development, okay, as a defense against the sanctions from the West, okay, and the kind of exploitation of their markets that the West has been attempting for the last uh, 30 or 40 years. And so now, with the organization of BRICS and the development of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they found, okay, an answer to exploitation by the West, and also found an answer to the development problems they were having and to the growth problems they were having. Okay. Meanwhile, we here in the United States, have been developing. We have been deindustrializing because of the orientation we took, to the open economy. That is specifically the financialization of our uh, 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 economy, okay, and the reliance on our currency model to bring us goods from the rest of the world in return for the electronic bits of information that we were sending to other countries. Uh, this has made us not a financially poor country, but it has made us a poor country from the standpoint of manufacturing resources and from the standpoint of productivity of real goods. We're still very strong in services, of course, and our manufacturing. We still do manufacture some things. It's not a total disaster, but obviously the Chinese have vastly outdistanced us in terms of the possibility, in terms of their capacities to manufacture. And the Russians have outdistanced us uh, in our capacity to produce uh, uh, the military capacities that we have needed, okay, as well. The Russian factories are vastly outdistancing us in this way. So it's time for us to shift away from the open economy model we have been following, um, towards a national economics model uh, for the United States. We have to do basically the same thing that Russia is doing. We have to open up a portion of our economy to trade because we need certain things from other parts of the world. Okay, so we need to be attentive to trade, and we need to nourish certain kinds of trade and collaboration, okay, with other nations. But we have to newly focus on our own country and developing the aspects of our country that have been decaying over time due to the over financialization of, um, um, of our economy and also society. So I think all that, okay, is very interesting. I think this column of Alastair's, okay, is very interesting, uh, 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 as well, in its interpretation of what is happening to Russia and its interpretation of the Trump administration, too, and what is happening with the Trump administration as well. I think it underestimates, though, the failure of the Trump administration to bring along the whole nation with it. He doesn't seem to recognize the stresses and strains that are going on here in the United States and the implications of those stresses and strains for the international policies that Trump uh, uh, is trying to follow. But obviously, at least it's obvious to us, that he won't be able to follow those for too long. Okay, D, any further comments on this?
No, I don't have further comments.
Okay, so let's get into the comments from our folks here. John B is here and is giving us lots of comments. Says, a great article for Hockett. However, I believe U.S. domestic matters will determine the future of U.S. aggressive foreign policy. Trump's 90 days will bite hard domestically. Boeing, Ford, viability. Yeah, I completely agree. It's having a devastating effect on Boeing and Ford, two of our major industries. We can't afford to lose those industries. Even when it says, hi, why don't I think Trump wants war with Iran or China? And I think he's more inclined to go after Greenland and continue support for the greater Israel. Well, I think if he doesn't have war with Iran and he doesn't have war with China and he doesn't have war, uh, uh, with Iran, then how is he going to continue the support, okay, for greater Israel? Because one thing the Iranians are going to do is they're going to continue to counter the possibilities for greater Israel, and our support is not going to stop that. The stronger the Iranians get, and they are more they oppose Israel, through the axis, okay, of resistance, the less the chances for Israel to get, okay, to greater Israel. In fact, I think they're on the point of collapse now. The internal divisions in their society are promising the decline of Israel, no matter what kind of support we continue to give them. Now, Trump, may choose to go after Greenland, but I don't think that's the kind of help, okay, that we need. I think we need a reconcentration on this country, and I know that Trump is never going to consider it, but that doesn't change the facts as to what we need. We need that Green New Deal. Some of us have been talking a lot about. And unless Trump is willing to develop a version of that, I think his presidency is going to be a failure and he'll be going nowhere, even if he avoids war with Iran and China and Russia. John B. says, most U.S. consumer products are a hybrid of imports from multiple nations. Tariffs threaten the viability of those businesses. Right. Shipping ports are quite as imports drop. Many in industry will be unemployed, and Trump is going to have to meet that particular problem, unless he wants there to be a great victory by the Democrats in 2026, which will then hamstring what he does for the rest of his term and may even lead to his impeachment and conviction this time, because he's done so many things directly opposed, to our democratic structure. Even when it says probably thinking these options would be less costly, both from a military and political point of view. John B. says the U.S. is at risk of degenerating into a social morass. As Doge disrupts government support schemes, people can be sent into panic responses,
Okay.
fertile ground for internal military and political coups. I think the disruptions of Doge uh, uh, um, um, in the government, while they've been serious and damaging, I think they're about to end, because I think Trump and Elon, are about to split up. I mean, Elon's foray into government has been absolutely disastrous for his economic interests, as has been his support of Trump. If he had uh, supported Harris, instead of Trump, he'd be sitting pretty now from a financial standpoint.
Go lay down.
I mean, he wouldn't have had any trouble. He wouldn't be, having people vandalizing Teslas. He wouldn't be having the great collapse of Tesla stock. He would have been able to continue operating in China. I mean, his move into the government and in support of Trump has been a disaster for him. I don't think he's going to continue the disaster. John B. says, time is closing in for Americans. Trump's tariff, Doge time bombs may have triggered great social disruption not seen for centuries. I fear for U.S. internal stability. I do too. And he says, on the ground, uh, um, real actions, all those are possible. Even he says, I think these are red lines, I think too. About 30T of U.S. Treasuries are an issue. U.S. GDP 24T per year. The impact of paying out there is no, 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 no. It isn't a problem. Read my book, Fixing the
Yeah.
Debt, uh, um, um, without breaking America. It's on sale, Amazon for $10. Go read that book. It's one of the answers to the problem of paying off the debt as it falls due. It is not, a serious issue. We are a monetary sovereign. It is not a serious issue. Judamity Wilson says Trump claim it's not about backtracking, but it's not needing to be flexible on the tariffs he imposed on China. Whereas the industrial policy bills, we've covered that in previous streams. We're strong believers in industrial policy here. We know Trump did it the wrong way. Bob Hockett had a great article we went over in the last stream on Tuesday that dealt with the need for industrial policy. Evenly says, this said doesn't mean Trump will entirely refrain from provocation. I completely agree. John B. says, globalization and outsourcing has been turned on its head by Trump's tariffs. The two actions are fundamentally in opposition, yes. Not talking about the money, I'm talking about the supply of real resources in return for the USD, for the redemptions, of USD. I know you're talking about the supply of, of real resources, but we have real resources in this country. And if we turn to building up our manufacturing again, and our productivity again, there's not going to be a real resources kind of problem. Now, there may be such a problem if Trump doesn't engage in industrial policy. I mean, I certainly agree with that. But what I am saying is that the formal process of paying back, the debt is not uh, um, um, a problem. First of all, the debt is to be paid back in 30 years, not in 10, because there's also, also 30-year debt. But as long as the debt is paid back according to its schedule, there's no reason to believe the paying back of debt is going to be inflationary, if that's what you mean, John B. Again, read my book. Even Pond says, Dr. Joe, I didn't mean to imply Israel will be successful, but the support for greater Israel will continue. I understand. So what I'm saying is that I don't think the support for greater Israel can continue for long, because I think Israel is on the point of being defeated and splitting apart. And that I think the groups that founded Israel, John B says, no problem with the debt. I'm a decade-long MMTer. Okay, that may be, but what you said above was that about 30T of U.S. Treasuries are an issue. U.S. GDP 24T per annum. The impact of paying out 30T over 5 to 10 years is an impossible mountain for U.S. To ascend. But domestically, it's too big a flood of uh, um, 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 uh, liquidity. If what you're meaning to say there is that the paying back of the debt is going to be inflationary because it's too big a flood to introduce into the economy. Uh, well, first of all, lots of that debt is um, uh, um, uh, held by foreigners, so it's not going to be paid back, into the domestic economy. But also, even that is to be paid back here, uh, for reasons I go into in my book. There's no reason to assume that the payback of debt, okay, is an inflationary problem. Okay, I cover that. I have a chapter on inflation in that book. So again, read my book. Okay, and then we can argue about it. Okay, if you like. So let's now go on to our next piece. Our next two pieces are from uh, you know, um, 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 you know, from Mike Whitney, who believes that the negotiations that Trump is engaged in right now are just a pretext for preparing the way for for war uh, um, um, uh, 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 with Iran. And his first article on this on April 15th is entitled, "Is Trump using the nuclear talks, quote unquote, as a pretext for war uh, um, with Iran?" He wrote this on April 15th. It's 2,700 words. It's not cool, Bobby, paying taxes so we can bomb a country into oblivion on Israel's behalf. Well, I don't know if Trump uh, is assuming that he's going to collect any additional taxes, while he bombs Israel, uh, or I should say Iran, on Israel's behalf. I think he plans to finance that through deficit spending. Actually, I'm not sure how he plans to finance it. I'm not sure whether he seriously thought about that. Here's what the media is not telling you about last Saturday's um, nuclear talks with Iran. There were no negotiations, not in the conventional sense of the word. At least what actually took place was more akin to a late night comedy skit than a gathering of diplomats hammering out a deal on nuclear enrichment. At no point but the members of the Iranian team in the same room as the members of the American team. That's not what I heard. Okay, what I heard is that at the beginning they were not in the same room as the members of the American team, but by the end of the negotiation, that the Iranian foreign minister and Steve Witkoff were in the same room and they were talking to each other. Okay, this is from other people who have written about this. Okay, delegates from the U.S. sat in one room while delegates from Iran sat in another, shuttling handwritten messages back and forth as they might have done in the 19th century before electronic communications. They did not debate the nuclear issue either. No, the confab was convened merely to settle issues related to the nature of negotiations themselves and the format. Format, what does that mean? This is different from some of the Larry Johnson articles we've already gone over about the nature of the negotiation. It means the Iranians are not going to negotiate nuclear enrichment and economic sanctions with the Trump team if the Trump team is going to include all manner of extraneous issues unrelated to the topic. It means that Iranians are not going to proceed unless there is explicit agreement that the U.S. will maintain the normal protocols for diplomatic engagement, particularly as it regards the administration's propensity to use every opportunity to threaten its rivals. Format employs ground rules, and those ground rules are as follows. Rule number 1, no threats. Iran wants a firm commitment that the U.S. team will not resort to bellicose saber rattling and other forms of childish behavior. Trump has already broken this rule, as we will show later in the article. Rule number 2, Iran will not discuss its strategic missile program, which is perfectly legal under international law. The missile program is not, quote, on the table, unquote, nor is it up for debate, period. Rule number 3, Iran will not discuss its relations with allies in the region, including Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. That is not on the docket either. The U.S. must agree to refrain from inserting this topic into the negotiations. Rule number 4, the U.S. must not use the negotiation to challenge Iran's inalienable right to develop nuclear power for peaceful purposes as long as its enrichment program conforms with regulations approved under the terms of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. Iran has the same rights as every other signatory of the NPT and will not give up those rights to accommodate the discriminatory and petulant demands of Donald Trump. Not going to happen. By the way, none of this information is being provided to the American people via the Western media, which filters all news on Iran through their own perverse ideological lens. Most of the above summary was gleaned from more reliable sources located in Iran, where the coverage is not entirely shaped by an Israel-friendly, agenda-driven type of media. This is from an article at Press TV. Quote, the first round of indirect talks between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States took place on Saturday in the city of Muscat, with both sides agreeing to reconvene next week. It was mediated by Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi. The talks were led from the Iranian side by Foreign Minister Sayed Abbas. Sayed Abbas Arakshi, and from the American side by U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff. In a, quote, constructive atmosphere, unquote, marked by mutual respect, the two sides exchanged their respective positions on Iran's nuclear programs and sanctions, communicating through their Omani host. Note, they stated their positions. They did not actually negotiate on those positions. I suspect that's true. After nearly 2.5 hours of back and forth exchanging notes through the Omani mediator at least 4 times, then Arakshi and Witkoff met briefly before leaving the venue. In his remarks following these talks, Arakshi offered a glimpse into the meeting's tone and substance. Quote, we had 2.5 hours of indirect talks, and as the first meeting, it was constructive, unquote, he said. The top Iranian diplomat emphasized the meeting laid a foundation for continued engagement. Quote, the atmosphere in the meeting was such it guaranteed the continuation of the process, unquote, he said. Looking ahead to the next round, scheduled for Saturday, April 19th, which is today, of course, Arakshi added, quote, we will try to enter the formal agenda of the negotiations. Naturally, a timeline will accompany it as well, unquote. Quote, these are aspects of the negotiation format which will be determined in due course. But what truly matters is the content and the basis upon which we're going to negotiate, unquote, he asserted. Reflecting on the outcome of the first round of talks, Arakshi said he believes the two sides came close to identifying that basis, and if in the next meeting we can finalize it, and we can begin substantive talks on the very foundation. That's from Press TV. Donald Trump tweeted, the United States spent $8 trillion fighting and policing in the Middle East. Thousands of our great soldiers have died or been badly wounded. Millions of people have died on the other side. Going to the Middle East is the worst decision ever made. Ooh. Sounds good so far, right? Formal negotiations have not yet begun, but the atmosphere is constructive and positive, which is a relief. It's worth noting, however, these are, simply the preliminary confidence-building steps that are being taken to allay the deep and justifiable distrust the Iranians have towards the Trump administration. It was Trump, likely at the behest of Netanyahu, who walked away from the first deal, the JCPOA, that everyone else endorsed: United Kingdom, France, Russia, China, and Germany, plus the EU, and which provided an ironclad guarantee that Iran would never be able to build a nuclear bomb. That wasn't good enough for Trump, because what Trump wants is what Bibi wants: regime change. Here's more. Iran's foreign minister further explained that no inappropriate language was used, and the parties demonstrated their commitment to advancing the talks until an agreement is reached that is desirable for both parties and is based on an equal footing. He stressed that both sides are aligned in their desire for meaningful progress, raising hopes for a favorable outcome if and when the negotiations progress. Quote again, certainly neither we nor the other side are interested in fruitless talks for the sake of talks, wasting time, or drawn out and exhausting discussions, unquote, he said. Both parties have stated their desired outcome is an agreement reached in the shortest possible time. However, this will not be an easy task and will require full determination from both sides, unquote. According to Arakshi, the U.S. has shown signs of commitment, but Iran remains cautious. He acknowledged that Washington has made considerable efforts to signal its willingness for a fair deal, yet emphasized the need for thorough reflection. Quote, at this stage, we need to assess this round, of talks carefully, work more precisely on the issues discussed, and review and consult on them at various levels. Second round of talks is scheduled for Saturday, he confirmed. This is from Press TV. Once again, this all sounds rather promising, but the, quote, proof is in the pudding. Once the two teams start to discuss centrifuges, enrichment, and round-the-clock inspections, they could come to loggerheads again. We'll have to wait and see, even though there does seem to be room for hope. Here's more. Talks are to be held next Saturday in a different location. Touching on a brief encounter with Witkoff, Arakshi stated, we've always observed the diplomatic decorum in our interactions with American diplomats. This time was no different. Following the conclusion of this first round of indirect talks in Tehran and Washington, the White House also issued a statement on Saturday describing the discussions as a step forward in achieving a mutually beneficial outcome. According to the statement, Witkoff, quote, underscored to Arakshi that he had instructions from President Trump to resolve our two nations' differences through dialogue and diplomacy. U.S. President Donald Trump, speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One later in the day, struck an optimistic tone. Please excuse me while I take a couple of pills at this point, and then I will come right back. U.S. President Donald Trump, speaking to reporters Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One later in the day, struck an optimistic tone. Quote, nothing matters till you get it done, so I don't like talking about it, but it's going okay. The Iran situation is going pretty good, I think. That's again from Press TV. And then Mike Whitney says, everything sounds so rosy, what could go wrong? Witkoff, likes Arakshi. Arakshi likes Witkoff. Both men are pleasant, businesslike, and professional. Even Trump sounds pleased with the results. Quote, the Iran situation is going pretty good, unquote. Obviously, there is reason to be optimistic for the first time in 8 years. Perhaps there's a silver lining after all. But no less than 48 hours after the confab had wrapped up in Iran, Trump decided to launch into an insulting tirade during an unscheduled press conference in the Oval Office. Here's what he said. Quote, we've got a problem with Iran. I'll solve that problem, Trump said ominously. Iran has to get rid of the concept of a nuclear weapon. They cannot have a nuclear weapon, unquote. They don't have a nuclear weapon, Trump. Quote, I want them to be a rich, great nation. The only thing is one thing, simple. It's really simple. They can't have a nuclear weapon, and they've got to go fast because they're fairly close to having one, and they're not going to have one, unquote. Quote again, and if we have to do something very harsh, we'll do it, and I'm not doing it for us. I'm doing it for the world. Ah, God damn. He's full of shit. Yeah, Bonnie says he's full of shit. These are radicalized people, and they cannot have a nuclear weapon, unquote. Radicalized people are the ones who live here. Here's the video Jason Brodsky tweeted. Noteworthy today, President Trump, he has the feeling that Iran's regime is, quote, tapping us along, unquote, expressed impatience with Tehran, threatened to strike its nuclear program. What did they say with ground rules? No threats, Trump. Why is Trump saying these things? Doesn't he know his envoy is engaged in sensitive negotiations that could be torpedoed by his threats? Doesn't he know that Iranian officials, including the Supreme Leader, Foreign Ministry, and military figures, have stated repeatedly they do not want to be threatened by the United States. They will resist any attempt to change their behavior through coercion. Some people will say, quote, that's just Trump, unquote. But I disagree. This is deliberate. How can it not be deliberate? Surely Trump is not so cognitively impaired that he doesn't understand Iran's sensitivity to his bully boy tactics. Does he want them to withdraw from the talk so he can use it as a pretext for launching airstrikes on Israel? Is that what this is all about? We think it is. We think Trump is using the negotiations to conceal his real objective from his supporters, who still believes he wants to avoid pointless foreign wars. We think Trump is using the talks, quote unquote, as a casus belli for war. Why do we think that? Well, aside from Trump's flagrantly provocative remarks, there's also the damning admission from Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who, quote, spills the beans, unquote, in this short video. Witkoff starts off by very persuasively making the case that Iran, quote, having a bomb, unquote, but then he quickly shifts gears and inserts a unilateral demand that Iran give up its ballistic missiles. That is the, quote, hat tip, unquote, that reveals the game that is being played. Iran's missiles are not only perfectly legal, unquote, under international law, but clearly Iran needs those missiles to defend itself against U.S.-Israeli aggression. Listen to how skillfully Witkoff interjects this outrageous demand into a statement, hoping viewers won't see what he's up to. And then there's a video by Witkoff, but that video is not here. But I guess it may be coming down there. But anyway, Trita Parsi from the Center for Responsible Statecraft, or maybe it's the Institute for Responsible Statecraft, tweeted, Witkoff confirms to Fox Trump is seeking to limit Iran's enrichment to 3.67%, just as the JCPOA did. Israel wanted Trump to blow up Iran's nuclear program, which would lead to war. Trump said no. Trump correctly put U.S. interests ahead of Israel's on this issue. Okay, there's the video from Witkoff. I won't play it. It would be utter madness. This is a quote from, no, it's not a quote yet. It would be utter madness for Iran to surrender uh, uh, um, uh, um, um, its ballistic missiles. Anyone following developments in Gaza, Syria, or Lebanon can see that. And in fact, officials in Iran have already reacted to this latest attack on their sovereignty. Check out this clip from an article at Press TV. Quote, a spokesman for the Islamic um, uh, Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, has emphasized that Iran's national security and defense capabilities are not up for any negotiations. Quote, national security, defense, and military power are among the red lines of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which cannot be discussed uh, um, uh, or negotiated under any circumstances, unquote. Brigadier General Ali Mohammed Naini said on Tuesday ahead of the second round of indirect talks between Iran and the United States and Oman. Quote again, last year's missile attack on Israel exposed Israel's weak security foundation, proved Iran's offensive capabilities as a missile and drone power in the region and the world, and instilled a sense of hope in the resilient Palestinian nation and the oppressed people of Gaza. Naini said. This is from Press TV. And like Whitney says, non-negotiable means non-negotiable. It means Iran's ballistic missile program is not, quote, up for debate, unquote. It's an essential part of Iran's national security. Witkoff can try to link the missiles to Iran's nuclear program, but he will not garner the support of the international community or legal experts on this fundamental issue. The matter is settled, and the fact that Witkoff is trying to squeeze it into negotiations further suggests that Trump is pursuing an Israeli concocted agenda that will end in war. Yes, I agree with that very much. Let's see what I do. So there's a graphic with Netanyahu and planes, and Israeli attack on Iran is imminent. The graphic is from minpressnews.com. An article that appeared in Tuesday's Guardian has alluded to another demand that Trump will make, in the upcoming talks. Here it is. Quote, Iran is expected to resist the U.S. proposal to transfer its stockpile of highly enriched uranium to a third country, such as Russia, as part of Washington's effort to scale back Tehran's civil nuclear program and prevent it from being used to develop a nuclear weapon. The issue, seen as one of the key stumbling blocks to a future agreement, was raised in the initial, largely indirect talks held in Muscat, Oman, between Iran's foreign minister, whose name is Abbas Araghchi, Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff. Trump is arguing the stockpile amassed over the past 4 years should remain in Iran. Iran is arguing the stockpile amassed over the past 4 years should remain in Iran under the strict supervision of the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency. Tehran sees this as a precaution or a form of insurance in case a future U.S. administration withdraws from the agreement, as Donald Trump did in 2018 when he rejected the 2015 deal that was brokered by Barack Obama. Tehran says that if the stockpile was to leave Iran and the U.S. pulled out of the deal, it would have to start from scratch, in enriching uranium to higher purity, effectively punishing Iran for a breach committed by Washington. Iran expected to resist the U.S. plan to move the Iranian stockpile to a third country. This is from The Guardian. I think Iran's position is very fair on this. I wouldn't expect them to give up their stockpile. This short excerpt helps to explain why Iran accelerated its enrichment program. They were not planning to build a bomb, which they opposed for religious reasons, but wanted to use the enriched uranium as a bargaining chip in their future dealings with the U.S. As it happens, that was a bad strategy that merely makes Iran look like it is not complying with its treaty obligations under the terms of the NPT. In any event, we expect that Iran will cave in on this issue and allow the uranium to be shipped to Russia in the spirit of compromise. It's worth noting that Iranian leaders are in constant contact with Moscow and must comply with Putin's requirements to maintain Russia's strategic support, which includes Russian air defense systems, electronic warfare, weaponry, strategic fighters, and logistical support. In the event of a war with the U.S. and Israel, Russia will assist Iran, but only if Iran has made a sincere effort to resolve the nuclear issue peacefully and in accordance with its obligations under the NPT. What's clear is that the U.S.-Iran talks were set up to fail. That is apparent by Trump's hectoring, abusive threats, and Witkoff's lunatic demands. The quote, peace candidate, unquote, does not want peace at all. What Trump wants is to repay the wealthy donors who shoehorned him into office on the back of $100 million of Zionist cash. Actually, cash from one person, okay, which is Adelson. Money like that does not come without strings attached, which means that the donors expect something in return. In this case, what they want is a war with Iran, and Trump is the man who can deliver that war. All he needs is some type of credible justification, which the failed talks are going to provide. And that's the end of that piece. Before we go to the comments, in the interest of time, I think I'd like to go, right to the next piece.
That sounds good.
Okay, so I'll go right to the next piece because I think we need the time. We're running way behind because we spent so much interesting time on the Alastair Crooke thing.
Yes.
But that was really good. Let's see. Here is the other Mike Whitney piece, which is an excellent piece. What this is in response to, it's a supplement to the earlier piece. What's in response to, okay, is that the New York Times article happened, and Mike Whitney is responding to the New York Times article and its significance for his thesis that these talks, okay, are just a pretext for Trump to attack Iran. So please go ahead, Dee. This is your turn.
New York Times transforms Trump into plucky paragon and propaganda masterpiece.
Yes.
And Mike Whitney.
And there's Lucky Paragon himself. He's walking on water.
I was thinking the same thing. Too funny. The remake of Donald Trump into a strong, independent leader who is not controlled by the wealthy Zionist who got him elected is the prevailing subtext of the New York Times blockbuster article, Trump waved off Israeli strike after divisions emerged in his administration. The content of the article is not nearly as important as the subtle, flattering way the authors portray Trump. The Times, you may recall, relentlessly demonized the president for nearly a decade, leaving readers to wonder why they would suddenly look so favorable on him. But that, of course, cuts to the heart of the matter, which is why the article was framed in the way it was. The authors clearly wanted their readers to believe that Trump makes his own foreign policy decisions and is not merely following a script that was written in Tel Aviv, by the advisors of Bibi Netanyahu, and that appears to be the main thrust of the article. Here's an excerpt. Israel had planned to strike Iranian nuclear sites as soon as next month, but was waved off by President Trump in recent weeks in favor of negotiating a deal with Tehran to limit its nuclear program, according to administration officials and others briefed on the discussions. Mr. Trump made his decision after months of internal debate over whether to pursue diplomacy or support Israel in seeking to set back Iran's ability to build a bomb, at a time when Iran has been weakened militarily and economically. I would say that about Israel, not Iran.
Yes.
The debate highlighted fault lines between historically hawkish American cabinet officials and the other aides more skeptical that a military assault on Iran could destroy the country's nuclear ambitions and avoid a larger war. It resulted in a rough consensus for now against military action, with Iran signaling a willingness to negotiate. Israeli officials had recently developed plans to attack Iranian nuclear sites in May. They were prepared to carry them out, and at a time when optimistic times were optimistic that the United States would sign off. The goal of the proposals, according to officials briefed on them, was to set back Tehran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon by a year or more. Almost all of the plans would have required U.S. help, not just to defend Israel from Iranian retaliation, but also to ensure that an Israeli attack was successful, making the United States a central part of the attack itself. But now Mr. Trump has chosen diplomacy over military action. In his first term, he tore up the Iran nuclear deal negotiated by the Obama administration. But in his second term, eager to avoid being sucked into another war in the Middle East, he has opened negotiations with Tehran, giving it a deadline of just a few months to negotiate a deal over its nuclear program. Trump waved off Israeli strike after divisions emerged in his administration. New York Times. The objective of this excerpt is not to inform readers about an Israeli attack that never took place, but to drive home the point that Trump, acting as the supreme, quote, decision maker, stood up to Netanyahu, blocked the Israeli plan to, you're going too quick,
Sorry.
stood up to Netanyahu, blocked the Israeli plan to strike Iranian nuclear facilities, and opted instead for diplomatic negotiations with Iran. It
Okay.
says here,
Okay.
Trump, Trump waved off Israeli strike after divisions emerged in his administration. Israel developed plans for attacking Iranian nuclear facilities that would have required U.S. assistance, but some administration officials had doubts.
Okay. So you can go to this blog and listen to the article for 15 minutes, okay, if you want. That's available there. Please continue, D.
Can you see how this fits with the overall intention of the four journalists to present Trump as a strong but restrained leader who acts exclusively in America's interest and makes every effort to avoid the pointless foreign wars he disparaged during his presidential campaign? Can you see how it might benefit Israel not to portray Trump as another Zionist yes man who clicks his heels and does whatever he is told, but instead remains true to his, quote, America First ideology and his commitment to peace? In order to grasp what's going on here, let's read the opening line again. Israel had planned to strike Iranian nuclear sites as soon as next month, but was waved off by President Trump in recent weeks in favor of negotiating a deal with Tehran to limit its nuclear program, according to administration officials and others briefed on the discussion. So, we are told with breathless urgency that Israel was planning to attack Iran. But as the authors clearly state a few paragraphs later, Israel never seriously considered attacking Iran by itself. Never. So, we must assume the quote breathless urgency was completely fabricated in order to emphasize the point they were actually trying to make, that Trump is not an Israeli sock puppet implementing the Zionist agenda, but a resolute and ferociously independent patriot who puts America's interests before anything else. Isn't that what they're saying? Indeed it is, but how does that square with the facts as we know them? Not very well. Hasn't Trump boasted repeatedly how he moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and gave the Golan Heights to Israel? Didn't he give Bibi the green light for expelling the Palestinians from Gaza and turning the Strip into the quote new Riviera? Hasn't he dubbed himself quote the best friend Israel ever had and launched attacks on pro-Palestinian protesters on campuses across the country?
Again, and there's Trump in a uniform with some pom poms and the Israeli insignia, of course, the Star of David. Okay, and
He's a cheerleader for
he's a cheerleader. Except I can't imagine him actually jumping up and
Israel, Israel, go Israel.
yeah.
Pom poms. And what about Yemen? Is Trump bombing Yemen for Israel or for his red state tub thumpers who think he, quote, walks on water?
Oh, and that explains the first graphic with him walking on water.
Yeah. And then there's Syria, which is presently ruled by Al Qaeda. Is that the outcome Trump wanted? Or was it part of Bibi's grand vision for a new Middle East? Here's more. Earlier this month, Trump informed Israel of his decision that the United States would not support an attack. He discussed it with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when Mr. Netanyahu visited Washington last week, using an Oval Office meeting to announce that the United States was beginning talks with Iran. I know Bibi's face was funny. So Trump stood up to Bibi and put him in his place. Does anyone really believe that? And notice how the authors never say that Trump officially nixed the plan, just that he temporarily postponed it until a more opportune time. And when might that more opportune timing arrive? Why, after the Iranians are forced to ditch the nuclear talks, do Trump's preposterous demands, of course? This is how his whole political slapstick has been scripted from the very beginning. Lure the naive Iranians into talks they never requested. Make ridiculous demands that are certain to be rejected, and then threaten to blow a full-blown war when Iran abandons the talks in frustration.
And by the way, those tactics are very reminiscent of those used by Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, that's the whole dismal plot line in a nutshell. Yeah, and that's what we see with with Gaza as well.
Yes.
Tucker Carlson. It's worth pointing out that a strike on the Iranian nuclear sites will almost certainly result in thousands of American deaths at bases throughout the Middle East. The cost the United States tens of billions of dollars The cost of future acts of terrorism on American soil may be even higher. These aren't guesses. Those are the Pentagon's own estimates. A bombing campaign against Iran will set off a war, and it will be America's war.
So,
Don't let the propagandists lie to you.
so it's likely that Tucker was addressing Trump
Mm-hmm.
with this tweet.
Mm-hmm. For Trump and Bibi, failed negotiations do not represent, quote, failure, but success. Failure means that they have their justification for launching a war, which was the goal from the very onset. The benefit of going through the motions by convening talks that were designed to fail is that it helps burnish Trump's bona fides as a peacemaker, which is an illusion his supporters still cling to unflinchingly, even while bombs rain down on innocent Yemeni women and children. Trump can opine that he exhausted all the opportunities for peace and is only pursuing the, quote, military option because I have no other choice. Surprisingly, the New York Times piece even alludes to this in a short clip about Vice President J.D. Vance. Here's the excerpt. Mr. Vance, with support from others, argued that Mr. Trump had a unique opportunity to make a deal. If the talks failed, Mr. Trump could then support an Israeli attack, Mr. Vance said, according to administrative officials. There it is in black and white. All Trump needs to do is to impose conditions on Iran that they will reject. And Viola, there's your pretext for war. And Trump has already made demands that far exceed anything that was agreed upon in 2015 when the JCPOA was approved. Trump has insisted that Iran give up its ballistic missiles that are legal under international law and need for self-defense, terminate its relations with its regional allies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, and dismantle its entire nuclear enrichment program, which is Iran's inalienable right under the term of NPT. In short, Trump has not simply moved the goalpost, he has extracted them far from the playing field and shipping them to Tel Aviv. As you can see, this is all an extravagant hoax aimed at laying the groundwork for war. Obviously, the editors of the New York Times understand this, just as they understand that the success of any protracted conflict with Iran will require the backing of the American people, which means that Americans must have confidence in their leaders. That is why Trump is being lionized as a strong and independent leader, because those are the qualities that will help him persuade the people that a war with Iran is in America's interest, when in fact the only one who benefits is Israel. So yeah, Mossad Chief Derma meets U.S. Envoy Witkoff in Paris ahead of the U.S.-Iran, I guess, talks.
I think the photo to the left is actually Ron Dermer, isn't it?
Yes,
And the photo in the center is
Witkoff.
Witkoff. I don't know who the photo on the right is. There's nothing like that in the catch.
Okay.
Okay, Ron Dermer is very well known to, um, to Napolitano, Judge Napolitano.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, uh, I think that's a convincing argument that certainly the dynamic here could be just a dynamic to create a pretext, okay, for war. Uh, I do think, though, that it would not be wise to go to war because I think the United States is likely to be defeated,
Exactly.
if we do go to war. And I think the alliance of Russia and China and Iran is very strong, and Iran will be supported with the best equipment, okay, Russia has.
Hmm.
Even when the war starts, I suspect that Russia has already shipped. Uh, there was a video I was watching today, and in the video, they were claiming the most advanced of the air defense weapons of Russia has been shipped over to Iran. Um, uh, that means the S-500 systems, are in Iran. And if that is true, that means they have the definite capability. This wasn't true with the S-400 systems. There was a little question
Hmm.
about whether they could do the following.
Hmm.
The S-500 systems can certainly knock the B-2 bombers out of the sky. And this means that something Trump is going to rely on is not going to be available to him. The B-52s can be handled by the S-400 systems
Hmm.
with no problem at all. Iran has a lot of these already, by now. Uh, as far as defenses against the fighter jets of Israel, the S-400s are perfectly capable of handling those. Uh, the only thing that could possibly, give the Iranians trouble is nuclear missiles coming from Ohio class submarines. That the U.S. might want to deploy here. But if we try to deploy that, I'm sure the Russians would then be coming in with their own forces to counteract those submarines. Okay, and also the Chinese as well. I don't think they're going to allow Iran, to meet, a nuclear bombing uh, without a retaliation from them because Russia and China want to see Iran survive because Iran is so important to the future of their trade routes and the economy of their two countries. Iran uh, sits in the center, okay, of the Belt and Road Initiative routes and also the Russian trade route from south to north that's in the process of developing now. And I don't think those two countries are going to want to give those up. They consider those to be a vital interest, okay, of their countries. They're going to do everything they can, to defend Iran and to
Hmm.
support it. And I think the United States is going to grievously suffer in any such war, and that I think will be driven out of the Middle East. All our assets, okay, in the Middle East are going to be destroyed. There are further developments that we have to talk about, and those will come as we go through the four relatively short pieces from Larry Johnson that still remain for tonight. Uh, okay, so have you any more comments on that article, D?
Um, yeah, as was said before, it would be devastating for the
Right.
U.S. and Israel.
It would be devastating for the U.S. and Israel. It would be devastating for the Iranians too, but they will emerge from it intact as a nation.
Hmm.
Uh, they will suffer some, but they've suffered for years under the sanctions. And I think a war like that, with the Iranians winning, would also be the death of the sanctions.
Hmm.
Because I think the BRICS nations, would thoroughly support Iran. And some of the articles we'll go into now will give us some reasons for thinking that. There's one new comment here from John B. He says, exactly, Joe. Inflation limits real supply. It can limit real supply. But if supply can keep up with inflation, but there's no reason to believe that the payback of the debt is any more inflationary than the issuance, okay, of new debt. Uh, there's an argument uh, in my book from uh, from myself, actually based on an argument that was advanced, by Professor uh, uh, um, um, Fullweiler, Scott Fullweiler, uh, that the issuance of currency to pay back debt would be no more inflationary by itself than the issuance, okay, of new debt, okay, would be.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you might want to take a look at that chapter in my book where that argument, okay, is advanced.
And you know something? There's a large Jewish population in Iran. And I don't think Israel really thinks about the Jewish population in Iran.
All right, I don't think they do, but there's only about 30,000 now. Okay, it's smaller than it was because when the Ayatollahs originally took over,
Mm-hmm.
there were lots of Jews who left Iran because the Ayatollahs at first were not too friendly to the Jews, but over time the situation adjusted, and the traditional Iranian situation of Iran being a friendly place for Jews seems now to be the situation. There
Okay.
seem to be conflicts between the Jewish community and the Muslim community inside of Iran. The Jews seem to be protected and doing well. And they're not at all associated with Israel, of course, which is one reason why that's true. So at least that's my understanding of the current situation there. I don't know if it's correct or not. Okay, let's get on to Larry's pieces. They are fairly short pieces. We'll take them in tandem. I will begin the first piece now, which is what is that? The first piece is called "Russia Ain't a Chinese Sidecar." That was done on the 16th of April by Larry C. Johnson in his blog Sonar 21, or one of his blogs anyway. Uh, and there's a picture of Xi Jinping, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and Vladimir Putin talking. I want to draw your attention to an article by A. Wes Mitchell that appeared in the National Interest in August 2021. The article, "A Strategy for Avoiding a Two-Front War," is an excellent summary of how the U.S. foreign policy elite view the world. The U.S. faces two formidable enemies, Russia and China, and we need to figure out a way to screw them over and maintain um, 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 our hegemony. But Mitchell is not engaged in an academic exercise. He prepared a version of this paper for the Pentagon Office of Net Assessment in fall 2020. This was a roadmap for the war in Ukraine, i.e., provoke Russia into attacking Ukraine, and then with Western help, beat the hell out of them. How did that work for you, U.S.? I learned of this article today while listening to Alexander Mercouris. Mr. Mitchell is an intelligent, well-educated man, but he's captive to an ideology and worldview that plagues the deep state. He conjures up a Manichaean world, portraying Russia and China as ravenous imperialists hell-bent on devouring the peace-loving countries of the world, while touting the United States as the force for good. He ignores the fact that the United States, not Russia or China, has been the one country during the past 70 years that has launched uh, color revolutions and relentlessly attacked and pillaged scores of nations around the world. This piece has one purpose: create a straw man. Only in this case, it is straw man to justify the U.S. military expansion, but doing so under the guise of diplomacy. Mitchell correctly acknowledges the United States lacks the military strength and resources to simultaneously engage both Russia and China. At least he is not insane. He discusses three diplomatic options that could be employed to contain Russia and China. Option one, quote, flip unquote, the weaker. Perhaps the most common form of sequencing is to align with the weaker of two rivals in order to
Mm-hmm.
concentrate resources on the stronger. This is the method that um, um, that Britain used in the Edwardian period when it recruited Tsarist Russia, against which it waged a decades-long Cold War in Central Asia, no less intense than our own, into an alliance against Imperial Germany. Okay, this was done towards the end of the 19th century and in the early 20th century. Uh, okay, but the option of flip, okay, the weaker, hasn't worked for us so far. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
we went to Russia, we tried to flip them, we have failed, okay, to flip them. We got them involved in the Ukraine war instead. Option two, defer competition with the stronger. That means deferring competition with China. The second sequence of strategies to lay rivalry with the stronger of two opponents in order to deal conclusively with the weaker. The mid-16th century Republic of Venice employed such a strategy to deflect the threat of uh, 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 the rising Ottoman Empire, deal conclusively with its rival on the mainland. Uh, specifically Milan was a city-state. That was rivaling the Republic of Venice. The similar logic guided Britain's ill-fated quest in the 1930s to appease Germany in order to prioritize naval resources for the Far East and buy time for rearmament in Europe. Option three, co-opt both rivals. The third and most difficult, but perhaps most elegant solution for the simultaneously problem has been to transcend it entirely, to negate its pressures by co-opting both rivals into cooperative structures that prevent or mitigate conflict. This was the method that the 19th century Austrian statesman Clemens von Metternich used to enmesh Austria's flanking rivals, France and Russia, in a system of concert diplomacy that kept the peace in Europe for almost a century. So, what does Mr. Mitchell propose? The war in Ukraine? The leitmotif of the Russian Europe policy, should be, adamantine resistance to Russian expansion, culminating in a decisive defeat for Russia's present aim in Europe's borderlands. If history is any indication, Russia only takes détente with an adversary seriously after it has been forced to do so by a defeat or serious setback. This was as much a precondition for Ronald Reagan's success at Reykjavik after the Soviet defeat in Afghanistan as it was for the English statesman who brokered the Anglo-Russian Entente after Russia's defeat at Port Arthur in 1905. Attempts to reach détente before Russia has suffered such a setback are not only likely to fail, they're also likely to be counterproductive insofar as they implicitly concede territory and validate the wager of Russia's current leaders that renewed empire in the West is achievable by force of arms. And the only problem with this is I don't think Russia is creating a renewed empire in the West. It was trying to neutralize the state of Ukraine to protect itself. It's achieving that end, and that's going to end its empire building in the West. The equivalent of Port Arthur or Afghanistan today is Ukraine, says Mitchell. The United States would wish to see Russia suffer a military rebuff of a sufficient degree of magnitude to prompt its leaders to reassess their assumptions about the permissiveness of the post-Soviet space as a preferred zone of strategic expansion. America can help bring about this outcome, much as it did in Afghanistan, by providing locals the means to better resist Russia at higher volumes than it's done to date and encouraging its European allies to do the same. We should significantly raise the cost for cyber and other attacks on the United States, including via reciprocal attacks on Russia's critical infrastructure and by sanctioning Putin's inner circle and the secondary markets, um, uh, for Russian bonds. Incidentally, Russia doesn't need its bonds. It can become a monetary sovereign and won't have to issue bonds. This pain, however, must have a goal beyond simply punishment, namely to inflict a defeat for strategic effect with the calculated aim of convincing Russia that its chosen path of westward expansion is closed. By contrast, U.S. policy towards Russia and Asia should be calibrated to encourage a redirection of Russia's focus and energy in this direction. Such a policy would consist of economic, military, and uh, uh, um, political planks. There you have it. If you think the ghouls at the Pentagon tossed this paper into the trash or, or filed it away in a cavernous warehouse, you are naive. Mr. Mitchell provided the raison d'etre for provoking Russia into attacking Ukraine and a strategy for supporting Ukraine with weapons, intelligence, and money. This article is laced with many false, wrong-headed assumptions. For example, Mitchell assumes Russia's economy is weak and incapable of matching the military output of the West. Whoops! How did that turn out? Another misguided, erroneous assumption. It is not unique to Mr. Mitchell. It also is embraced by most of the deep state strategists, is that Russia is the prison bitch with respect to China and can eventually be convinced to break with Beijing, Mitch writes. By widening the power disparity between China and Russia, the pandemic has heightened Russia's economic dependency on China as a source of capital markets and international political support. Paradoxically, the very fact of the steepening dependency is likely to increase Russian fear of becoming a sidecar to Beijing's ambitions and create incentives for Moscow to reorient its foreign policy. And Larry says, I have been astounded, and that was a long quote from Mitchell, I've been astounded by the number of U.S. experts and pundits who fervently believe the relationship between Russia and China is superficial and temporary. They genuinely believe the United States can cynically play Russia off against China, and that neither country is smart enough to discern the U.S. ploy. I asked um, 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 Foreign Minister Lavrov about this very thing. He scoffed at the notion. While Lavrov noted that Russia and China, by virtue of their respective histories, have some differences, they are fundamentally united to counter the imperialist ambitions of the West. Russia and China have entered into a comprehensive strategic partnership that encompasses uh, defense, manufacturing, trade, finance, and diplomacy. The war in Ukraine, the genocidal policy of Israel in West Asia, the threat to destroy Iran, and the tariff war against China are not separate, unrelated conflicts. The Russian and Chinese leaders understand this and are acting in concert to counter the U.S. divide and conquer strategy. That is why Russia and China conducted a joint military exercise with Iran in the first week of March. That is why Russia, Chinese, and Iranian diplomats met twice in March, first in Beijing and then a week ago in Moscow. They're coordinating policies and discussing strategies for dealing with the threat posed by the United States. I don't think that Donald Trump and his team of bobbleheads comprehend this. In other words, he views Trump's team as yes people who bobble their heads in response to uh, the articulations of Donald Trump. He might be right, about a few of the bobbleheads, but I'm not sure Tulsi Gabbard is exactly a bobblehead. I'm not sure Susan Wiles is a bobblehead either, but that's another question. Okay, so that's the first of the contributions from Larry. It's important because it emphasizes, it gives you a picture of how closely the Russians and Chinese are and how solid, the alliance is between them and how they responded, to U.S. efforts to divide them. Okay, it should also be emphasized that there was an opportunity for the U.S. to divide Russia and China and to make sure the two would never come together. Okay, but the U.S. blew it.
Mm-hmm.
And when was that possibility around? When was it really a possibility? Well, it was before Putin in the early 1990s. All the United States has to do was to listen to Jeffrey Sachs and to participate in the rebuilding of Russia after the collapse, okay, of the Soviet Union. If we had participated in the rebuilding of Russia, given them economic assistance and capital, and welcomed them into the EU and into NATO, which is what even Putin wanted when he first came into power,
Mm-hmm.
there would be no Russia-Chinese alliance today. That was our chance, and we blew it because of Russophobia. Bill Clinton blew it. He blew it. He had the chance, and he blew it. And the Bush administration blew it too. But Clinton continued blowing it and continued to push Russia out of Europe because the United States did not want Russia to be a rival to itself in relation to influence in Europe and control in Europe. We didn't want Russia inside of Europe. Russia wanted to come into Europe, and we rejected them. And that's why the Russian and Chinese alliance, and that's why BRICS exists, okay, today. So we screwed up. And after that opportunity was frittered away and Russia and China became close, there's no further opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Russia's just not interested in us anymore. It has its independent course. It's very good for them. They stood up to the sanctions. They stood up to the Ukrainian war. They've come out of it with what looks like a stronger economy than we have here in the United States. And certainly with a stronger economy than they had when they went into the war. So there is that. Let's see quickly if we have any comments. No additional comments. So let's move on to the next of Larry's pieces. This is a very interesting piece.
Okay.
It's called, let me move to the top of this. It's quite short.
Okay.
It's called Donald Trump is spinning plates in the deadly minefields of Iran, China, okay, and Ukraine. And it's your turn, D. It was written on the 16th of April, 2025 by Larry Johnson.
Okay.
And
Yep, that's Trump.
here's Trump spinning plates. If you're looking for a video metaphor of Donald Trump's foreign policy, or if you the following, and there he is also. There's the guy spinning plates.
Okay.
Okay, please go on, D.
Alrighty. Yep. President Trump is spinning too many plates and is frantically trying to prevent them from falling to the ground in a big crash when it is a juggling act on the Ed Sullivan Show. It is entertaining, but when it is creating an exacerbating crisis in 3 hotspots around the globe, it is damn terrifying. Let's start with Israel and Iran. Trump has been under enormous, let me see here, has been under,
Okay, you
oh,
should be seeing it in,
oh, here it is, enormous pressure to greenlight an attack on Iran, according to an article in the Wednesday edition of the New York Times.
he's talking about that same article that, White, Mike Whitney just talked about.
There were many reasons that Israeli officials expected Mr. Trump to take an aggressive line on Iran. In 2020, he ordered the killing of General Qasem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's most elite military unit. And Iran sought to hire hitmen to assassinate Mr. Trump during the last year's presidential campaign, according to a Justice Department indictment. But inside the Trump administration, some officials were becoming skeptical of the Israeli plan. In a meeting this month, one of the several discussions about the Israeli plan, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, presented a new intelligence assessment that said the buildup of American weaponry could potentially spark a wider conflict with Iran that the United States did not want. A range of officials echoed Ms. Gabbard's concerns in the various meetings. Susie Wiles, the White House Chief of Staff, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and Vice President J.D. Vance all voiced doubts about the attack. That's the good news. Not everyone advising Trump is a crazed Zionist loon, eager to bomb. Buried farther down in the article is some bad news. In attacks on Israel in April, most of Iran's ballistic missiles were unable to penetrate American and Israeli defenses. Hezbollah, Iran's key ally, was decimated by an Israeli military campaign last year. The subsequent fall of the government of President Bashar al-Assad in Syria eliminated a Hamas and Tehran ally and cut off a prime route of weapons smuggling from Iran. Air defense systems in Iran and Syria were also destroyed, along with the facilities that Iran used to make missile fuel, crippling the country's ability to provide new missiles for some time. This is pure, unadulterated male bovine excrement. I think I have to pay Ray McGovern royalties every time I use his artful phrase. The authors of this piece are repeating propaganda about Iran's April 2024 attack. Iran announced in advance and did not use its most sophisticated missiles. Strangely, the authors ignore Iran's October 2024 attack, which featured hypersonic missiles and completely skunked Israel's air defense system.
Yes, 32 of the missiles got through with respect to the Nevatim air base was struck 32 times by hypersonic missiles.
The authors double down on stupid by asserting that Iran's, quote, air defense system was destroyed in the October 27th attack.
Yeah, I think that date should be October 26th. I noticed Larry calling it October 27th a number of times, but I think the real date was the 26th.
Mm-hmm.
Please go on.
If U.S. and Israeli military planners genuinely believe that this is the case, they are making a huge mistake. Their assumption is wrong. It is akin to believing that if you tie a sheet to your back, you can fly like Superman. I tried that when I was 8 years old, but I jumped from the top of an 8-foot shed. Gravity won over my imagination. As I anticipated, Witkoff's negotiations with Iran are getting some heavy pushback from the Zionist crowd. The New York Times also reported on Wednesday, despite mixed messages from the Trump administration over whether it wants Iran to completely dismantle its nuclear program, Iranian officials said on Wednesday that they would keep talking to U.S. officials and focus on what America says in private during negotiations. Divisions have emerged within Mr. Trump's inner circle about what exactly the United States is demanding from Iran in the talks. Mr. Trump has said that he does not want Tehran to weaponize its program and obtain a nuclear bomb. The U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has said in recent weeks Iran must dismantle its nuclear enrichment program as part of a deal with Mr. Trump. And though Mr. Witkoff initially said in a Fox News interview on Monday that Iran would enrich uranium at a 3.6% cap, similar to the limit laid out in 2015 nuclear deal struck between Iran and world powers. He then walked it back in a social media post on Tuesday, suggesting that dismantling the program was the goal.
That suggests, by the way, that he had agreed to the 3.67% attack, but then when he got back and he talked to Trump, that Trump said to him, no, we need to have the dismantling of the program. So that was a shift in position by Witkoff.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, please go on.
Iran is not going to surrender its peaceful nuclear energy program. It also has an enrichment program enriching to 20% for medical purposes. Iran won't surrender on that either. We will know by Saturday evening Eastern Time whether Trump's war plan for Iran is revived.
So if any of you have seen anything on that, please put it in the comments, because as of going into this stream, I wasn't able to find anything on the results of the meeting, which are critical at this point.
Then there is a tariff war with China. Trump did that, not Biden. China canceled further purchases of Boeing commercial airliners, expecting Boeing deliveries to China were projected to add about $1 billion in Boeing's cash flow. The real danger is China's decision to limit the export of rare earth minerals to the United States. The following graphic shows the quality or the quantity of rare earth minerals required to produce just one of each of the weapon systems illustrated.
Okay, before we go into that graphic, just a comment with respect to Boeing. Their deliveries to China over a period of time were expected to decline because China is in the middle of a process to produce its own commercial airlines.
Mm-hmm.
And it will be through with that process fairly soon. But for 2025, there was $1 billion in Boeing's cash flow, at issue, and Trump has destroyed that. So I'm sure the Boeing people are very, very happy about that, and that if they still have any money left, they will give very large contributions to Democratic candidates for Congress in 2026. Okay, anyway, I will go to the graphic now. 400 kilograms for the B-2 bomber,
Mm-hmm.
2,300 kilograms for that ship. That's a destroyer. 4,100 kilograms of rare earth metals. In the text just below, please read that, D.
Okay. The quantity of rare earth metals required to produce 1 unit of U.S. military equipment. 400 kilograms F-35 fighter. 2,300 kilograms Early Burke class destroyer. 4,100 kilograms Virginia class multi-purpose nuclear submarine.
Okay, those are interesting figures. Be sure to remember, if you want to get those figures in pounds, to multiply each number by 2.2. That's a lot of pounds for
Mm-hmm.
1 unit of those things. Where are the rare earth metals coming from? Well, a lot of them are coming from China.
Trump has made a very bad bet. He thought that imposing exorbitant tariffs on China would force Beijing to beg Washington for relief. That ain't going to happen. The Chinese are livid and are reacting as if the United States attacked and destroyed a fleet of their ships. China has more cards to play than does Donald Trump, and they have the political will to play them. Finally, there is Ukraine. Vladimir Zelensky has been launching a barrage of verbal bombs at President Trump and Vice President Vance during the past week. I doubt Trump is going to put up with his crap much longer. There are signs that the U.S. is starting to pull the plug of Operation Ukraine. For example, the U.S. military is shutting down its operations at the Polish Ryazkov base. Note, this base went operational in November 2021, which provides further support to my thesis presented in my article on Tuesday that the U.S. was provoking the war with Russia in order to weaken Russia and force it to come to the side of the West. There is also a report that the flood of weapons Biden authorized in the closing months of his tenure as president are now just a trickle. Uncle Sam's warehouse appears to be closed for further Ukrainian business. I discussed the situation between Russia and Ukraine with my friend Daniel Davis today.
Okay, and then what Larry does is adds, a very good video to watch. Daniel Davis is a lieutenant colonel, retired, very perspicacious, a decorated guy in the Gulf War. Okay, and a very, very good analyst and very fair person. He almost became the assistant to Tulsi Gabbard, at the DNI office. She wanted to hire him, but he was torpedoed by um, 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 the Zionist lobby
Mm.
because he is not friendly to the Israeli actions, okay, in Gaza.
Okay.
Okay, so there is that. But the point I want to take from this, which I think is very important, is that the U.S. is already beginning to shut down its operations, with respect to Ukraine, which reflects a desire of Trump to get out of Europe and concentrate on other areas of the world, but also to make peace with the Russians, okay, in Europe. Making peace with the Russians is consistent with trying to make peace um, with the Iranians. Now, Trump can decide to go either way, but what I'm saying is if he decides not to attack Iran, but to make a peace agreement with them, that is consistent with his making peace with Russia. If he does those two things so he can concentrate on China in the Far East, that's a consistent policy. Okay, it makes sense. But if he goes further, okay, and he attacks Iran, he loses all the ground he's gaining with Russia, in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, the idea that the U.S. is shutting down its operations, okay, at the Rezhov base, generally speaking, shutting down its support to Ukraine, is an idea that argues against um, um, the Whitney thesis uh, um, uh, uh, that the talks with Iran are just a pretext for war. I'm not saying that this is a definitive contradiction to that idea, but it's a straw in the wind that maybe Trump does want to make peace uh, um, in West Asia. especially if he wants the United States to retain a foothold in West Asia. Trump may also be getting intelligence from other people telling him that, not only would war in Iran be disastrous for the United States, but it would be disastrous for Israel for too, and Israel might not survive the war. And that would not please the donors of Donald Trump either. So there's that to take into account.
Okay, I was looking at Press TV, and they have an article, but it just said Rome talks made progress on principles of, quote, likely deal. Optimism warranted, but with great caution.
Okay, I think that is very good news at the start, because if they agreed on principles, they certainly would agree on the principle that no more threats from the United States to Iran. Okay, because Iran is pretty stuck on that particular principle.
Mm-hmm.
Another principle they're stuck on is that they're willing to talk about um, um, their nuclear program, because they're not interested in having a bomb anyway, but they don't want to talk about anything else. And so if they agreed on that principle, it augurs well for the future of the talks. Okay, but Witkoff will have to stop shoving in some contradictory thoughts from Trump or some of the war hawks on Trump's team. Okay, Evelina points out Russia wanted to join the UE. Why would have Russia wanted or needed to uh, join NATO? I think because Russia just wanted to be included in the West. Okay, in everything West. I know Trump wanted to get into NATO too. And he made the proposal to Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton said, well, I'll go back to talk to my other people. And then he came back with an answer and said, no, sorry, you can't be part of us. That was like one of the stupidest things that Bill Clinton ever did, in
Mm-hmm.
my view. In my view, it just, I don't think the United States could have stayed as the hegemon anyway, because I think if Russia was included, okay, inside of Europe, it would have been a countervailing factor to the total domination of Europe by the United States. So Europe would have emerged as an independent pole of power. But that would have been good, for the multipolar world as well. If you would have had a pole with Europe as one of the poles and Russia in it, and China, as another pole, and America, as another pole, there still could have been a variation on BRICS. And, we might have been even further into the multipolar world, than we are now. It's certainly a possible scenario coming out of that if Russia had come into Europe in 1999 or the year 2000 or something like that. Evelina asks, aren't there EU nations that until very recently weren't part of NATO? Yes, I think there still may be EU nations that are not part of NATO, but I'm not sure. I'm wondering how much influence Witkoff has with the pro-war crowd in the U.S. Will he stick with Trump uh, um, um, regarding peace with Iran? Witkoff is Trump's creature. Where Trump goes, that is exactly where Witkoff is going to go. Obviously, Witkoff, is pro-peace, but he's Trump's peace agent. That's why Trump has brought him in as the special envoy. If Trump changes, his position, then he won't have any need for Witkoff anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what's going to happen there. So let's move on to the third of the four articles. We're making quicker progress now, even though it's quite late. There was a third article by Larry that was very interesting and very significant, I think, for the peace war thing, okay, with Iran. Oh, by the way, I think Larry is actually in the camp who believes that in the end that Trump is going to attack Iran. So he's not coming at this from the point of view that he necessarily disagrees, with what Mike was saying, okay, about a pretext. But Larry is introducing some facts that call that particular verdict into account. So Larry says the title is Saudi and Iranian talks strengthen on the eve of the next round of talks between Washington and Tehran. This was dated from April 17th. And there's a picture of the Ayatollah Khomeini in the background. There, not a picture of, Khamenei.
Okay.
Interesting. But there's the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia. I forget his name, Fiad or Fuad, something like that. Okay, and the former foreign minister of Iran, I think he died in the helicopter crash,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken. And the former president of Iran, Raisi, who also died in the helicopter crash. I certainly did not see this coming when I read that a Saudi delegation showed up in Iran. I was inclined to believe the Saudis were being used as a U.S. measure to warn Iran it had better accept Trump's deal or else. Well, I was wrong. It looks like the Saudis want to be sure that Iran does not blame them if Israel and the United States decide to attack Iran in the coming weeks. Here's the surprising readout from the meeting in Tehran. Engagement and cooperation with the Islamic Republic of Iran is the cornerstone of regional security, which will lead to greater prosperity for the countries in our region. The Islamic world must act in a coordinated and unified manner against the occupation and expansionism practiced by the leaders of the Zionist entity.
Mm-hmm.
I came to Tehran today to present His Excellency, the great Supreme Leader, with our intentions to strengthen Iran-Saudi ties at all levels and to form a partnership deeper and stronger than ever before. The Supreme Leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Khamenei, quote, "We are ready to help the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in all necessary fields, and if it requests our assistance, we will oblige as Islamic brothers." Saudi Minister of Defense, quote, "From now on, I say openly and with pride, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia considers Iran a friend, a brother, and honorable neighbor," unquote. Wow, says Larry, looks like Iran and the Saudis are ready to go shopping for furniture to adorn their new home. This is a remarkable turnabout compared to 2015, when the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, commonly known as the Iran nuclear deal, was signed on July 14, 2015 in Vienna, Austria, between Iran and the P5+1 countries, China, France, Germany, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Along with the European Union, Iran was on the ropes. It was diplomatically isolated. Even the Chinese and Russians were cooperating with the rest and imposing sanctions on Iran. ISIS was stirring up a storm in Syria and fighting some hellacious battles with IRGC forces keen on saving Assad. The Saudis were at war with the Houthis, an Iranian ally. Tensions between Tehran and Riyadh were quite high. What a difference a decade makes. Starting in late 2017 or early 2018, Iran persuaded Russia, and China to join it in an annual naval military exercise. The first one kicked off in March 2019. Then there has been one every year since then at the same time, i.e., the first week of March. Iran was welcomed into BRICS in the summer of 2024 and followed uh, 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 that milestone by signing the Iranian Russian Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership on January 17th in Moscow. Notwithstanding the fall of Bashar al-Assad in December 2024, with the West celebrating this as a major defeat for Tehran, Iran had strengthened its military capabilities thanks in part to Russian assistance. Iran's relationship with Russia and China has expanded and deepened during the last 3 years. Iran's foreign minister was in Moscow today, meeting with President Putin to discuss the planned Saturday talks with the delegation of the U.S. In Oman. Iran's chief concern at this time is trying to assess whether or not Witkoff's position, as presented last Saturday, has fundamentally shifted. Initially, Witkoff signaled that the U.S. was willing to accept a cap on Iran's Ukraine, on the uranium enrichment, referencing the 3.67% limit from the 2015 deal, rather than demanding the complete dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program, a stance more in line with Israel's demands. However, within days of returning to Washington, Witkoff publicly reversed course, stating that any final deal must require Iran to, quote, stop and eliminate its nuclear enrichment and weaponization program, unquote. Is this the new U.S. position, or is this just political posturing by Witkoff in order to placate Zionist critics? Here's a summary of the key issue. The uranium enrichment issue. The initial position of the U.S. was to cap it at a low level, 3.67%. The revised position of the U.S. and Witkoff, was to eliminate the enrichment entirely. The pundit consensus was that there's a focus on capping, and verification. I'm not sure what 1258 actually means. Perhaps there are references at the end of the article. I'll have to check that out. Second issue, dismantlement of the program. In the initial U.S. position, that was not a requirement. In the revised position of the U.S., it was a requirement. The pundit consensus was full dismantlement, was unlikely. The third issue is relief from sanctions. The initial position of Witkoff was that it was possible for compliance. The revised position of Witkoff was that's unclear. And the pundit consensus is that this is essential for Iran to sign an agreement, and that was the pundit consensus. And then the fourth issue was regional missile programs. The first position of Witkoff is it was to be addressed. Second position, of Witkoff is to be addressed. And the pundit position is it's not central to the current talks and, would not be taken up. The final issue, likelihood of a deal, but cautious optimism in the first position of Witkoff, uncertain in the second position of Witkoff, and the pundit consensus on this was optimism if the focus remains a narrow one on, the uranium, the enrichment issue, and the sanctions issue. If the talks on Saturday address only the uranium enrichment question, then prospects for a deal look good. However, if Witkoff presents new demands that Iran terminate all enrichment and eliminate its missile capability, Iran will reject the U.S. proposal and accuse Witkoff of bad faith. Here are some additional podcast interviews I've done over the last 2 days. The first is with um, uh, um, uh, Garland Nixon. He did the broadcast from the cabin of his Ford truck. The second one is a podcast hosted uh, by Andy Millette, who is an executive and entrepreneur based in the Atlanta metropolitan area, primarily known for his work in the natural resources investment sector and healthcare staffing. The last one is with a young fellow from India, Jyotishman Mudiar. He's the co-founder of the YouTube channel India and the Global Left. Here he has interviewed prominent intellectuals such as Raghuram Rajan, Jayati Ghosh, Norman Finkelstein, Prabhat Patnaik, and Vijay Prashad. I don't think I qualify as a prominent intellectual, but I was happy to have a chat with him, said Larry. And then he appends to his blog the videos that he talks about. Two of the videos that he talks about there. Okay, so that's cool. Let's check to see if there are any comments on that. But I have to point out that the tightening of ties between the Saudis, and the Iranians puts a further deterrent for the United States when it comes in to attacking Iran. Now, I don't know how much of a deterrent it is, because I think the U.S. thinks that a successful attack on Iran would probably turn the Saudis around. So what it does mean is that the Saudis are not going to assist the United States in terms of, the attack on Iran, because they've made a commitment to the Iranians. It's a fresh one. I don't think the U.S. is going to be able to coerce them to supporting its air attack. That's also true with other players in the Middle East. I think the Iranians have warned everybody, if they allow the U.S. to go over their airspace or in any way support the U.S. attack on them, they will be the targets, of the missile attacks, by Iran. Okay, so the Iranians have pretty much cut off, I think, any help that might come from any of the Gulf states inside of the Middle East. They're going to stay neutral. I think the Saudis are showing here that they're going to stay neutral. So I think that's a deterrent, for the U.S., because Trump is going to know that the whole attack on Iran is going to depend on the Israelis, and themselves. And that means the chances of success are less likely than they otherwise are likely to be. So Evelina says in her comments, interesting. So Wiskoff is Trump's peace agent and won't be needed if Trump would have changed his mind, as regards Iran. I think that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Says about the EU, I seem to remember that Spain in the early 90s had not yet joined, but by 2000, hadn't the Union already been consolidated in Western Europe? When the Russians were talking to Clinton about, joining up, I think it was in 1999 and 2000. It was in the last couple of years of, the Clinton administration, if I recollect. While it's true, countries from Eastern Europe had, not yet joined. No, they had not yet joined. And they was part of a movement to include all the countries of Eastern Europe, and Russia wanted in also. and NATO would have gotten, or at least the EU would have gotten, all the countries of Eastern Europe and Russia also. That would have been a very, very powerful economic thing. And if the U.S., had also given aid to the rebuilding of Russia, then the economy of the EU would have boomed, and Russia would have been a part of it. And it would have been an entirely different international situation today. If Clinton had only listened to Jeffrey Sachs, Jeffrey Sachs had the vision back then, and he still has the vision today. Yeah, I think Russia wanted to join NATO too, though. I think I'm still correct on that.
Yes, you are. I remember that.
Okay. So, good. So let's get to the final piece now of this very long show. Very long show, but I think very good show. Uh,
I saw on X that Netanyahu's having a fit.
Having a fit because the negotiations are going forward between the United States and Iran.
Yes, and he's having a fit because he's saying he's not going to relent. He's firm and all of that. That he doesn't want them to get nuclear weapons, and he's
Okay, so are there going to be further negotiations next Saturday?
yes, it's going to be further negotiations, but he's already panicking.
Yeah, of course he's panicking. Because if they come to agreement, uh, then the next step is to negotiate a two-state settlement for Palestine.
Right, because he says he doesn't want this to be an Obama 2.0.
Yes, he doesn't want this to be an Obama 2.0. This last article was on the 18th of April, 2025. I looked earlier for another article today, or that is an April 19th article from Larry Johnson, but I didn't see one earlier today. There might be one now that's been put up, but I didn't see one now. But anyway, so this
Don,
was from Sonar 21 also, and this is but Donald Trump to Europe. You want to fight Russia? Go ahead. It's all yours.
mhm.
Okay, D, this is all yours.
Yes, Donald Trump to Europe. You want to fight Russia? Go ahead. It's all yours, as Joe just said.
And there is Witkoff and Little Marco and Mike Waltz.
Marco Rubio dropped a bombshell on Friday as he departed Paris following talks with European and Ukrainian representatives. Marco Rubio announced if there are no signs of peace in the coming days, the United States will stop playing mediator between Russia and Ukraine. Marco was not offering his personal opinion. He was delivering a message approved by Donald Trump. The United States has given the Europeans and Ukrainians a deadline to end their efforts to sabotage a peace deal with Russia. If they refuse, the United States is going to pull uh, chokes and focus its attention on Iran and China. Marco gave the same message
They
to
pulled
Mark Rutte.
shots.
Yeah.
Is the expression. Yeah.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio informed NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte of a new peace proposal delivered to the Ukrainian delegation in Paris and to the Russian officials by phone. In a statement released by State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce, Rubio expressed President Trump's hope that the proposal will lead to a lasting peace in Ukraine. However, he warned that if a clear path toward peace does not emerge soon, The United States will withdraw from its role as mediator.
Okay, we don't know what's in the peace proposal by Trump, right? No, this is
No.
a peace proposal uh, by the Americans,
Mm-hmm.
okay, to the Ukrainians and to the Russian officials.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder what's in it.
Although the United States continues to provide some support to Ukraine's fight with Russia, President Trump apparently has decided to disengage, not abruptly, but methodically from the war. The U.S. is shutting down operations at the airfield in Poland, which has uh, been a major supply hub for Ukraine. No additional supplies of weapons and vehicles are being sent to Ukraine. Donald Trump rejected Zelensky's plea for more. You went too far.
Oh, sorry.
Zelensky's plea for more Patriot missile batteries. There are only two big shoes left to drop: withdrawal of U.S. military and intelligence personnel from Ukraine, and an end to intel sharing, particularly intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance SR data that is used to program Ukrainian missiles aimed at Russia. Russia, for its part, reacted with nonchalance to the news. Putin and his national security team are placing a higher priority on reestablishing diplomatic and economic relations with Trump. Given the warm welcome that Italy's Prime Minister received in a Thursday meeting with President Trump, the Kremlin realizes that the fissures within the European Union and NATO are growing at growing, and that the aid the coalition of the willing has promised Ukraine is not likely to materialize. I discussed the latest developments in Ukraine, as well as the upcoming talks on Saturday between Iran and the United States with Nima, and with Judge Napolitano and Ray McGovern.
Right. I should add here, okay, to this. Now, this is another straw in the wind that suggests that Trump is going to opt for peace because he's obviously beginning to accelerate the withdrawal of support from the Ukrainians, that he does want to wind things up there so he can concentrate on Iran and China. But I think he wants to wind things up in the Middle East also so he can concentrate on China. I think that is his particular direction. Now, in this discussion, with Ray, okay, and Larry, Ray was, uh, Larry was still holding to his position that there's likely to be a war, and that Trump is likely to decide on war.
Mm-hmm.
But Ray was optimistic, and he thought that all of the various straws in the wind we're talking about suggest that Trump is no longer listening to the Zionists, and that he has been prevailed upon by the real intelligence he's been getting from Tulsi Gabbard, okay, and from other people. Okay, could be from Putin himself. Uh, uh, Basically, I think what's going on is Trump is getting information about what really happened uh, when last fall, and last spring, the attacks on Iran took place, and the Iranians replied. And I think he's learned a narrative, a counter narrative that is closer to the truth about the success of Iran in those exchanges and the failures, okay, of Israel. And he realizes that Israel wants the United States to lead, okay, in that attack on Iran because it doesn't really have the capability itself to do anything, and that without the United States, it would be extremely vulnerable to an Iranian counterattack. And I think Tulsi has been getting counter narratives, probably from Dan Davis, who she's probably still talking to, even though he never became her assistant. And probably Doug McGregor is getting through to Trump also through contacts he has, including, through Tulsi, but he also has other contacts in the Defense Department. And I think Doug McGregor has been getting through maybe to Hegseth, because Hegseth is beginning surprisingly to support the idea that maybe, we don't go to war with Iran at this time. So I think information would get through to Hegseth through the contacts that Doug McGregor has in the Defense Department. And Doug is a very strong partisan of the idea, that attack on Iran would be disastrous for the United States, that we would be soundly defeated. He believes that also this conclusion is supported by a lack of success against the Houthis in Yemen, a lack of success that Trump is all aware of, because Trump, of course, is privy to the facts that we have lost some ships to the Houthis. They have done, serious damage to the Navy, that their attacks on Israel continued and are beginning to become more and more devastating to Israel. So the relative success of the Houthis, who have nowhere near the capability of Iran, if that information has been getting through to Trump, as I think it has, it would weigh heavily on his calculations, because if the Houthis can have the kind of success they're having, I think the Iranians can have 10 times that success, maybe 20 times that success. It could be a total disaster for Israel, and all the assets of the United States, all our bases in the Middle East, could be destroyed, by the Iranians. I know Doug actually believes that. Scott Ritter, also believes that, but I don't think that Scott Ritter has the contacts inside the administration Doug McGregor would have. So my theory is that information from Doug has been getting into the administration, and that's changing views inside the administration. Larry Johnson's information is also changing views, I think. But I think it's probably Doug McGregor who's getting inside, because ideologically, I think Doug McGregor is closer to Trump than all the others that we've been talking about.
Okay.
So I think that may be changing the views of Trump. And I think the thesis of Trump using a pretext, having a pretext for war, is also there. I think Trump is very mercurial and he can go either way. And right now, I think he's getting information that is telling him that it would be a disaster for the United States, to go up against Iran, that it would also be a disaster for Israel, and that he better not do it. So anyway, that's my view of the situation. I may be wrong. I respect greatly the analysis of Mike Whitney and also Larry Johnson's feeling,
Hmm.
his intuition that Trump won't be able to stop himself from attacking. But okay, I think that maybe the optimism of Ray McGovern is warranted in this situation, and I base the optimism I feel on my hunch that Doug McGregor has been getting through to the administration because of his contacts among the right wing people, and he was a former member of the Trump administration. He's the person Trump should have appointed as Secretary of Defense. But of course, I think his independence of mind was too much for Trump. He wanted a bobblehead to appoint,
Mm.
and Hegseth K is a bobblehead. That's why he appointed him. But still, there will continue ties between the administration and Doug. And I think that Doug is getting in with his very aggressive perspective on what's likely to happen if we have a fight, with Iran. So anyway, that's my hunch on it. Okay, any more comments, Dee?
No, I just, really hope things go as you say, that he's listening, to the right people.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Oh, yeah.
I'm tempted right now to go quickly to Press TV.
Okay.
Oh, gee, I had no idea there were talks in Rome. I thought they were talking, okay, in Oman. Indirect nuclear talks resume in Rome. And why is Iran distrustful of the U.S.? I'm looking at Press TV right now,
Okay.
and there's an article on Rome talks made progress on principles of likely deal, optimism warranted, but with great caution. As you said just previously,
Yeah, you can easily understand why.
right? But I clicked on the link
Okay.
and it says, let's see what it says. I probably should have ended it, but I couldn't resist, getting this news.
Well, I might as well get it in because you have a limited schedule now, so.
Yeah. Iran's foreign minister says the latest round of indirect talks with the United States and Iran yielded progress on principles of a potential agreement, warning though that any sense of optimism has to be accompanied by great caution. In a post on X, formerly Twitter, on Saturday, the foreign minister of Iran, Foreign Minister Aragshi, said that the quote relatively positive atmosphere unquote characterizing the talks in the Italian capital had resulted in advancement on the foundational aspects of a quote possible deal. The top diplomat, meanwhile, commented on Iran's stance on the 2015 nuclear accord between the Islamic Republic and world countries which is officially known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. Washington left the deal 3 years after its conclusion, before returning the illegal and unilateral sanctions that it had lifted as per the agreement, and piling up even more coercive measures on Tehran. Quote, we made clear that many in Iran believe the JCPOA is no longer good for us. To them, what is left from that deal are lessons learned, unquote. Personally, I tend to agree, Irakshi wrote. His comments came after leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, criticized the country as tying its various affairs to the negotiations that led to the JCPOA's conclusion, advising avoidance of associating national progress with this round of talks. And basically, the leader said indirect Oman tax talks go good, unquote, in early stages, but lack of trust remains about the other side. Leader says the indirect talks from Iran and the United States have been implemented well in their initial steps, but the Islamic Republic is, quote, very skeptical, unquote, of the other side. The Rome talks marked the second round of indirect discussions between Tehran and Washington in recent weeks, with Oman playing the role of the mediator. Talks were being held at the residence of Oman's ambassador to Italy, with both delegations stationed in separate rooms. Iran's delegation was headed by Irakshi, while Steve Witkoff, the U.S.'s regional envoy, led the American team. Iranian officials have emphasized any future deal had to guarantee removal of the sanctions and ensure full economic benefits for Iran, terms that were never fully met under the JCPOA. Irakshi also noted that, quote, the initiation of expert-level track will begin in coming days with a view to hammer out details. After that, we will be in a better position to judge, unquote. He concluded, for now, optimism may be warranted, but only with a great deal of caution. Well, I think that's all hopeful. Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Bakay also posted on X thanking Italy and Oman for facilitating the process. Okay, also remember that, in Larry Johnson's blog, he pointed out that the Prime Minister, of Italy had visited Trump and was talking to him. And no doubt they talked about, the Ukrainian situation, and no doubt he was supported, by the Prime Minister of Italy, but Trump was. And now we have the appearance of the talks in Italy when they were supposed to be, in Oman. So that's another straw, in the wind. Okay, that Italy also is friendly to the talks. Bakay reaffirmed Tehran's commitment to diplomacy in the face of global instability. Quote, we remain committed to the cause of dialogue and diplomacy as our world continues to face unprecedented challenges and threats to the rule of law and common human values, unquote, he wrote. So that was the Press TV article. That is optimistic because it does mean the talks will continue. Now, of course, Trump could be faking the whole talks thing, but Russia would probably be able to observe whether the United States was proceeding with a plan of attack on Iran, because preparations would be being made, and Russia would be able to see these from its satellite surveillance, and China as well. So they're not warning that there's a further campaign by the U.S. getting started with respect to Iran. I think the U.S. is still preoccupied with Yemen at this point, and is not making any progress there. I think we're mired down in Yemen. So I don't think any plans for an attack on Iran are going forward just now. I don't think there will be a surprise attack over the next week or two. They will continue to negotiate. So I think it does look more hopeful after the second round. It'll be interesting to see if Larry Johnson changes the position that he is taking over the next week, or if he still thinks the final outcome of all this is going to be an attack by Trump and the Israelis on Iran. We will see. It's certainly a conundrum.
Yes, it is.
Whether this will happen.
I mean, Trump will get hell from his base.
Yeah, he's going to get hell from his base actually right now, because there's a big part of his base that's the bomb Iran part. Big part of the Republican base.
Oh yeah, there's that part. Yeah.
Bomb Iran. There are also the Zionists who want to bomb Iran. So there'll be a lot of pressure building on the domestic front to actually go to war with Iran. On the other hand, the continued failure in terms of attacks on the Houthis will introduce a counterweight, to that, because if they continue to fail, against the Houthis, then that's going to affect the intelligence that Tulsi Gabbard is picking up, and is going to give weight to the argument that they can't fight the Houthis and fight Iran at the same time.
No.
Which is, I think that's kind of interesting, but it also gives weight, though, to the argument that if they can't beat the Houthis, they're not going to be able to beat Iran. Mm-hmm. So there's that.
And then he's got part of his base that are a bunch of, they're basically isolationists, They're just furious. People are furious that nothing's being done here.
Yes.
People are seeing more and more the catastrophe here.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a few last comments from Evelina. Evelina says, in the U.S., or maybe it would have remained a force for peace or defense, ostensibly, and less of an aggressor. What she's talking about, is NATO here. Well, she also said, so it would make sense for Russia to have joined with NATO to defend itself against NATO and the U.S. It would have remained a force for peace, for defense, ostensibly less of an aggressor. Sorry if I sound dense, but I can't even see the need for NATO. I never did, except to promote war. It's such a menace. And Evelina says, I despise NATO. Yes. Of course, it's been a force for war now for a very long time. Actually, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, it's been a force for war. Because it needed a reason to exist. So it needed to continue the Cold War at some level. And that was the problem.
Right, so it's been a destructive force around the world.
Yeah. So I think it's time to say goodnight now.
I think so too.
It's really time to say goodnight. It's 1 a.m.
Yes, thank you for having me, Joe.
Yeah, this was one of these marathon streams.
It's wonderful.
Oh, did you like it?
Yeah, the whole thing.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very good.
Well, you had a lot to cover, you know. You've been busy, you know, with the work at home that you've been doing, so you really had a lot that you had to go through.
Yeah, there was a lot here. Yeah. Okay, so I'll be back on Tuesday, and will you be having streams on Sunday and Monday, Dee?
I have to talk with Madeline.
Okay.
Well, next week, Harsh Med. Harsh Med's going to be joining me Thursday night
Okay.
at 9:30. So
Okay, that's good. Okay, Evelyn says, laugh out loud, good night. Yeah, when I come back on Tuesday, I think I'm going to come back at 8 p.m. on Tuesday
okay,
because I have a lunch commitment on Wednesday. Okay, and that's at 11:30, so we're going to have to get up fairly early. So, figuring again a 3-hour stream, I it would be good if I could finish, by 11 o'clock.
right, yeah. Since you're having longer streams,
Yeah, so
because you're limiting your days, yeah, it's better to start at 8.
right. At least on Tuesday, it's better to start at 8. I think Saturday is okay to start at 9.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but at least for this week,
Okay,
I think on Tuesday I'll start at 8 instead of 9.
okay. So I'll be ready.
Okay, thank you. And good night. Good night, everyone. And thank you
Good
for.
night. Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Okay, good night, Dee.
Good night.